Behind the glow of the American dream and the hard work of the Vietnamese community lie dangerous, hidden corners and brutal, unforgiving tragedies. In today's video, Vietnamese Case Files revisits 8 shocking cases that once stunned public opinion, cases in which nail salons, symbols of new beginnings, became scenes of violence and death. These include the heartbreaking story of a mother who sacrificed her entire life for her child, but was murdered over just $35, as well as the senseless death of an innocent 10-year-old boy who was killed before his parents' eyes. We will also delve into cases born of betrayal, greed in business, or blind, obsessive jealousy that led to the slaughter of entire families. Some victims fell to stray bullets, while others were attacked by the very relatives or partners they had long trusted. This video is not only a warning about safety while living abroad, but also a deep look into criminal psychology and the irreparable consequences left behind. Join Vietnamese Case Files as we turn back each page of these case files to understand the pain of those left behind and their long journey in search of justice. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese Case Files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. On the evening of December 29th, 2018, the busy end-of-year atmosphere-filled Crystal Nails spa located near Flamingo Road and Decatur Boulevard in Las Vegas. Inside the salon, the owner, Annie Nguyen, and her partner, Sunny Chung, hurried to serve customers. Suddenly, a female customer's credit card would not go through during payment, so she said she wanted to go to her car to get cash. Sensing something was wrong, Annie asked Sunny to go with her in case the woman tried to run without paying. Sure enough, the moment they reached the parking lot, the customer quickly climbed into the driver's seat of a black Chevrolet Camaro and prepared to speed off. Annie shouted for her to stop, while Sunny ran behind the car trying to keep it from leaving. But the engine suddenly roared, and the Camaro lurched forward. Sunny was nearly thrown off, managing only to cling to the rear of the car for a split second in desperation. Annie, determined to protect the fruits of her labor, stood in front of the car. Without a second's hesitation, the driver slammed on the gas. The car surged forward violently, striking the salon owner in a horrifying impact. Annie fell and was dragged beneath the vehicle. Sunny watched in terror as the woman he loved was run over and dragged under the car for about 15 meters right before his eyes. He screamed for help. A few nearby residents heard him and rushed over, but there was nothing they could do to change what was happening. Annie lay motionless on the road with catastrophic injuries. In panic, Sunny pulled out his phone and called 911, his voice breaking as he reported that his partner had been hit by a car. Not long after, the sirens of police and paramedics tore through the once quiet evening. Annie was rushed to the nearby UMC hospital, and Sunny followed anxiously, praying for a miracle. Back at Crystal Nails, spa once the couple's livelihood, the place had suddenly become the scene of a tragic homicide. In front of the salon, investigators from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department quickly set up yellow tape to secure the area. A long streak of burnt black tire marks stretched across the concrete in front of the salon, ending where the victim had collapsed. By the time officers arrived, Annie Nguyen had already been taken for emergency treatment. But the pool of blood in the parking lot and the many scuffs and fragments on the ground still made people shudder as they imagined the victim's condition. Witness Sunny Chung, still dazed and wearing a shirt stained with Annie's blood, became the first source of information. He recounted the collision in detail, saying the unfamiliar customer fled because she did not want to pay the $35 USD bill, then pointed in the direction where the black Camaro had just escaped. Police immediately collected every trace of evidence, including broken glass from the car's rear window, several streaks of black paint, and tire rubber left on the roadway. Investigators also took statements from nearby residents. They all described a similar scene. A young woman got into the car and without hesitation drove straight into the salon owner who was standing in front of the vehicle to block it. Notably, Crystal Nails' daughter spa's own security camera recorded the entire incident. Police immediately retrieved the CCTV footage to support the investigation. Although many details were still unclear, investigators could essentially determine that this was not an accident. Tragically, it was a homicide, because not long afterward, the victim died at the hospital from multiple traumatic injuries. This conclusion was officially confirmed by the Clark County Office of the Medical Examiner. The news quickly became a major shock to the victim's family and to the Vietnamese community in Las Vegas. Annie Nguyen was not only a beloved nail salon owner, but also a hard-working mother who sacrificed endlessly for her family. Her full name was Nhu Annie Ngoc Quỳnh Nguyen. She was 51 years old at the time of the incident, a Vietnamese immigrant who came to the United States after 1975 and lived in Little Saigon, Orange County, California. Annie was a single mother of 3 daughters and always worked tirelessly so her children could have a better life. She often skipped lunch, worked 14 hours a day, never took a day off, and carefully saved every dollar to send back to her family. Around 2005, Annie met Sonny Chung, and the two moved in together as husband and wife in Las Vegas. Although they were not legally married, they had shared more than 13 years together in both life and work. They jointly invested in and managed Crystal Nails, spa in Las Vegas, making it their primary livelihood. To neighbors and regular customers, Annie was gentle, kind, and exceptionally hardworking. She had a habit of calling customers by sweet terms of address, creating instant warmth, and she was willing to stay late if someone arrived close to closing time. Annie lived simply in a rented apartment near the salon, only occasionally returning to visit home in Garden Grove, Orange County. In the middle of December 2018, Annie's mother and her children traveled from California to Las Vegas to visit her. It was a rare family reunion, but cruelly, it was also the last. The family's overwhelming pain only strengthened the urgency for police to solve the case quickly and bring justice to light. The homicide was immediately classified as a high-priority case by the Criminal Investigations Division of the Las Vegas Police. In less than 24 hours, investigators obtained initial information about a suspect. The most critical lead was the getaway car. Thanks to Sonny's statement and the security video, police had a detailed description. A newer model black Chevrolet Camaro with a shattered rear window and a rental license plate. That same night, patrol officers found the Camaro abandoned in the parking lot of a nearby apartment complex. The vehicle sat alone, doors locked, with no one inside. A quick check confirmed it was the crime vehicle. Beneath the car were blood and hair matching the victim's DNA. And inside the car were fingerprints on the glass along with several receipts left on the seat. They included a recent car repair receipt and a fast food order receipt, all from locations not far from the crime scene, most likely used by the suspect herself. Forensic technicians immediately collected fingerprints from the vehicle and from papers, trash bags, and other items inside in order to identify who had been driving it. After cross-checking Clark County's criminal database, analysts found that the fingerprints matched Crystal Whipple, a person who had previously been arrested in Las Vegas. Reviewing her records, a clearer picture of the primary suspect began to emerge. Whipple was a Las Vegas resident, born in 1997. She came from a working-class family. Her mother worked as a restaurant server, and her father left early. Whipple's childhood was far from stable. She dropped out of school at 16, fell in with the wrong crowd, and quickly became entangled with the law. Records show she was arrested in 2016 in connection with a vehicle theft, but received leniency because she was still a minor. In 2017, she received probation for knowingly possessing a stolen vehicle. While on probation, Whipple continued breaking the law by using someone else's credit card and was arrested and sentenced to 4 months in jail in 2018. Not long after her release, Whipple was unemployed, drifting from place to place with her boyfriend in low-cost hotels around Las Vegas. Whipple's family admitted that in recent years she had become out of control. With this information in hand, on January 3rd, 2019, after 5 days of investigation, the Las Vegas police publicly released the suspect's name and photo across the media. It was Whipple's booking photo from a prior arrest, showing long black hair and a very young face. Police also released identifying details and urged the public to report immediately if they saw her. People in Nevada, especially the Asian community, were furious after hearing the news. The crime tip hotline rang non-stop with a flood of reports claiming to have spotted a young woman resembling Whipple in various places. However, Crystal Whipple had vanished. When investigators raided her rental address in Las Vegas, the room was already empty. Whipple had managed to pack up and leave right after the crime. Authorities began tracing her escape route. A key lead came from the stolen Chevy Camaro. Records showed the car belonged to a rental company and had been rented by another customer, but Whipple had taken it about 3 weeks earlier. Whipple did not know the person who rented the car, so she may have used fraud to obtain it, or bought it on the black market after it was effectively stolen from the rental company. Although that detail remained unclear, driving a stolen rental car and using a fraudulent credit card to pay for nail services indicated that Whipple had come to Annie's salon with a plan to scam from the start. Her prior criminal record also showed she was no amateur at this. After the crime, Whipple's movements were tracked through multiple sources of information. Details from her family indicated that Whipple contacted her mother in the first days of hiding. Whipple's mother and grandmother also appeared on television on Good Morning America, aired on January 6, 2019, pleading with her to turn herself in and promising to stand by her no matter what happened. In parallel, through investigative methods, police discovered that after abandoning the car in Las Vegas, Whipple fled to Boulder City, a small town near Lake Mead, about a 40-minute drive from Las Vegas. After that, information suggested Whipple continued on into California. She appeared in Los Angeles where she sought help from acquaintances to obtain a fake ID to avoid detection. Investigators suspected her goal was to flee to the East Coast, specifically North Carolina. Meanwhile, the United States Marshals Service and the FBI also joined the case due to its interstate elements. On January 11th, 2019, the FBI's Violent Crimes Task Force received information that Whipple might have reached the Phoenix, Arizona area. A resident called in to report seeing a girl resembling Whipple in a neighborhood in Glendale. This tip was quickly verified by the Las Vegas fugitive team and forwarded to the FBI. Federal agents immediately coordinated with local police to surround the area. That same morning, Crystal Whipple was arrested at a small house in the neighborhood without having a chance to resist. And so, after 11 days on the run, the intense manhunt ended with handcuffs on the wrists of the 21-year-old woman. Whipple's arrest was announced the same day. A Las Vegas police spokesperson later stated, "The pursuit ended after 11 days. No one should have to die over a $35 service bill at a nail salon." Whipple was booked into Estrella Jail in Maricopa County, Arizona, while awaiting extradition procedures back to Nevada. In less than 1 day, she appeared in court in Arizona and signed a waiver of extradition rights, agreeing to voluntarily return to Nevada to face trial. On January 18, 2019, a prisoner transport vehicle brought Whipple to the Clark County Detention Center in Las Vegas. This interstate manhunt involved more than 20 officers and agents from multiple agencies. It stood as proof of law enforcement's determination to pursue justice in a case that had shaken the community. From the leads and testimony they gathered, police successfully reconstructed the sequence of events. On the afternoon of Saturday, December 29, 2018, Crystal Whipple drove a black Chevy Camaro into the parking lot of a small strip mall on Flamingo Road. She did not have much money on her because the credit card she planned to use was in fact fake. At 3:45 in the afternoon, Whipple pushed open the door and walked into Crystal Nails Spa, where Annie Nguyen was at the counter as usual. The young woman asked for a new set of nails. The salon was not very crowded at the time, with only Sunny Chung in the back, which made Whipple's plan even easier to carry out. For about an hour, Whipple enjoyed the nail service, choosing polish colors and having the nails carefully applied. When the sparkling manicure was finished, it was time to pay the $35 service fee. Whipple took out a credit card and handed it to Annie, but the terminal quickly showed an error. Annie tried again a second time, then a third, but the transaction still would not go through. Clearly, something was not right. Annie's eyes became wary, while Whipple kept a calm expression and said she would go to the car to get cash, then picked up her handbag and headed for the door. With years of experience, Annie Nguyen sensed that something was off and that the customer might be trying to skip out on the bill. Annie called out for Sunny to go with the customer. The two quickly followed, Whipple out to the parking lot. By then, Whipple had already climbed into the waiting black Camaro and started the engine. Annie shouted and ran around to the front of the car. At the same time, Sunny rushed to the rear, trying to stop the vehicle. In an instant, Whipple hit the gas and the Camaro lurched forward. Instinctively, Annie placed both hands on the hood, hoping to stop the car. But the force was too strong and she was thrown backward. At the back of the car, Sunny also jumped aside when he saw the vehicle briefly reverse to gain momentum. Within just a few seconds, Annie's body was pulled beneath the car. Whipple continued accelerating, drove over the victim, and sped out of the parking lot with the car door not even fully closed, leaving chaos behind her. After committing the crime, Crystal Whipple sped through the streets of Las Vegas, trying to figure out how to escape after realizing the horrific thing she had just done. Reaching a quiet apartment complex, Whipple abandoned the car to avoid being identified, since it had a tracking device from the rental company. More than an hour later, when police traced the Camaro, Whipple was already far away. That night, Whipple went online, read the news, and learned that the nail salon owner had died. That meant Whipple was now facing a charge for killing someone, not merely assault or a typical theft. She decided she had to leave Nevada that very night. Some information suggested Whipple contacted an acquaintance for help, and that person advised her to go to her mother's home in Los Angeles. Although the details were not fully confirmed, the next morning, on December 30th, Whipple did in fact appear in Boulder City, heading toward California. By December 31st, 2018, she was in Los Angeles. Her family urged her to turn herself in, but Whipple refused out of fear. She bought a fake ID to use along the way and was determined to flee to the East Coast. The farther from Las Vegas, the better. In the first days of 2019, while the United States was welcoming the new year, Crystal Whipple continued her anxious escape. On television, she saw her own image plastered everywhere as a wanted fugitive and watched her mother and grandmother cry as they begged her to stop. Whipple's mind was in fierce turmoil, but in the end, she still wanted to reach North Carolina and start over. That plan never became reality. On January 11th, 2019, she was officially captured. With clear evidence and serious charges, the Clark County District Attorney's Office quickly brought the case to a grand jury. In July 2019, the grand jury formally indicted Crystal Whipple on charges of murder with use of a deadly weapon, robbery, and grand larceny of a motor vehicle. If convicted, the maximum sentence could be life imprisonment for first-degree murder or up to 20 years for second-degree murder. At first, Whipple appeared defiant. She refused to plead guilty and seemed prepared to fight the case in court. However, the proceedings dragged on, and the COVID-19 pandemic delayed many trials throughout 2020. Perhaps the long time in custody forced Whipple to think more clearly about her situation. Defense counsel negotiated with prosecutors that if she pleaded guilty, the charges would be reduced. Ultimately, in December 2020, Crystal Whipple agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. This plea deal helped her avoid a tense jury trial, and other charges such as robbery and auto theft were dropped. In her plea, Whipple admitted that she killed Annie Nguyen while fleeing after refusing to pay for the service. On February 5th, 2021, in a Clark County courtroom, Judge Tira Jones presided over Crystal Whipple's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was fairly full, with attendance from the victim's family members from California as well as the defendant's relatives. Whipple, then 23 years old, wore a blue jail uniform and was escorted to the defendant's table. The room fell silent as the judge reviewed the case, noting that a life had been taken over $35 USD. The prosecution emphasized the cruelty and senselessness of the crime and asked for a harsh sentence that matched its severity. Defense counsel argued that the defendant was young, did not intend to kill, and acted in panic while trying to escape, asking the court for leniency at the minimum level of 10 years. When it was time for the victim's family to speak, the entire courtroom choked with emotion. Christy Lay, the youngest daughter of Annie Nguyen, appeared via video screen due to post-COVID restrictions. Her voice trembled as she said the family had just visited her mother in Las Vegas during Christmas 2018, never imagining it would be the last time they would see her. Christy described her mother as the embodiment of sacrifice, someone who spent her entire life working tirelessly for her children. She looked straight at the defendant on the screen and said, "We miss our mom more than anything. I only hope she knows that none of her sacrifices were in vain." Many people in the courtroom quietly wiped away tears after hearing these words. As for Crystal Whipple, when invited to speak, she kept her head down and shook it in refusal. Throughout the hearing, she barely looked up and offered neither an explanation nor an apology. After listening, Judge Tira Jones delivered the sentence. The judge stated that this was a horrific tragedy. An honest, hardworking person had been robbed of her life simply for trying to collect a $35 USD service payment. After considering all circumstances, the court sentenced Crystal Whipple to 10 to 25 years in prison. This sentence followed the plea agreement. That meant Whipple would serve at least 10 years before becoming eligible for parole, and if parole was not granted earlier, she would remain incarcerated for the full 25 years. Although the sentence was not life imprisonment, the victim's family expressed satisfaction because justice had, to some extent, been served. After the hearing, Annie's daughters embraced and cried, carrying their mother's portrait as they left the courtroom in silence. On the other side, Whipple's mother and grandmother also wept as she was led away, mourning the future of a young woman destroyed by one terrible mistake. Whipple was transported back to the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center in Las Vegas, where she would serve her sentence. As the cell door closed, Crystal Whipple began the long years of paying the price for a single moment of wrongdoing at 21. Notably, the case of new Annie Nguyen sent shockwaves through the United States in early 2019. Major newspapers reported widely on it, highlighting the senseless brutality of the crime. A life was taken over a $35 nail bill. The public was stunned and outraged by the perpetrator's cold-blooded disregard for human life, while also grieving for the fate of a hard-working immigrant woman. On online forums, many people contributed more than $37,000 USD to a fundraiser to support the victim's family, along with heartfelt condolences to Annie's 3 daughters. The case also sparked discussion within the community about workplace safety in the service industry. Many Vietnamese nail salon owners admitted they frequently encounter customers who skip payment, but no one ever imagined someone could lose their life over a few dozen dollars. After Annie Nguyen's death, some nail salons in Las Vegas tightened their payment procedures, requiring deposits in advance or installing additional security cameras to deter bad actors. Some salons even equipped self-defense weapons and kept their doors locked during business hours to prevent similar incidents. At 2:30 a.m. on the 16th of February 2019, the stillness of a Clinton neighborhood was shattered by frantic screams and the sound of gunfire. Minutes later, 911 received a report of a domestic disturbance escalating into violence at a residence on Fox Hill Drive in the Hunt Cliff subdivision. Officers from the Clinton Police Department were immediately dispatched to the scene. As soon as police vehicles arrived, the situation spiraled out of control. From inside the house, a man suddenly opened fire on the officers, forcing them to take cover and call for reinforcements. Under the barrage of bullets, frontline officers scrambled to secure themselves and establish a perimeter. A quick assessment suggested that multiple people might be held hostage inside. The urgent situation was reported to command staff, and SWAT along with supporting units were mobilized to handle the armed hostage scenario. Within minutes, more than 50 police vehicles, ambulances, and SWAT units surrounded the home before dawn. Loudspeakers blared instructions telling residents to stay indoors or evacuate to a safer location. Inside the house, no one knew exactly how many people were present or what condition they were in, except the armed suspect. The tense standoff dragged on for 12 hours as observation robots and crisis negotiators were deployed to communicate with the agitated man. But all they received were hostile refusals, along with confirmation that 2 young children were still inside. After negotiation attempts, the 2 children were eventually released unharmed, giving SWAT the opening to move in since the suspect showed no signs of surrendering. A sniper took position and was authorized to neutralize the target before the tactical team breached the house. With the situation finally contained, officers entered to a horrifying sight. The home was in disarray, blood splattered across the floor, and walls riddled with bullet holes under the harsh artificial light. 4 bodies were found scattered in different rooms. The victims, 3 women and 1 man, were all deceased before officers reached them. Initial observations offered clear clues. Each victim had suffered multiple gunshot wounds, indicating extreme brutality and intent. A semi-automatic 9mm handgun was found near the downed suspect, likely the murder weapon. These details led investigators to suspect an exceptionally violent family massacre. A new question quickly arose. If the perpetrator had killed his entire family, what was his motive? At first, the crime scene offered investigators only cold numbers: 4 bodies, 3 women, and 1 man found lifeless inside the house. They could not immediately determine who was who, as this Asian family had no close relatives or neighbors nearby who could identify them on the spot. In this small town, the Vietnamese community was not large, and the family kept a low profile, so confirming their identities posed initial difficulties. Police secured the home and carefully collected every possible identifying clue, from IDs found in the victims' purses to name plaques on family photos hanging on the walls. A crucial lead emerged when investigators examined the wedding photos and family portraits displayed in the living room. One showed a Vietnamese couple smiling on their wedding day, and another depicted them with two young girls. Comparing these images with information on the suspect's Facebook page, police determined that the groom in the wedding photo was Le Nam, the homeowner, and the man shot by police while the bride's face matched one of the deceased women. From this, police formed the hypothesis that the victims were all members of Nam's family, possibly his wife, sister-in-law, relatives, or mother-in-law. These assumptions needed formal verification through relatives or official documents. During the examination, forensic teams also collected the victims' fingerprints and compared them to databases and the documents recovered. Just one day later, on Sunday, February 17, the Hinds County Medical Examiner completed the autopsies and officially released the victims' identities. According to the report, the four victims were Lan Thi Mai Van 30, Le Thi Mai Van 28, Phung Min Le 28, and Cho Thi Van 65. Police immediately cross-checked these names with information linked to Le Nam. The results matched the initial hypothesis perfectly. Lan Thi Mai Van was Nam's wife, Le Thi Mai Van was his sister-in-law, Phung Min Le was the fiancé of the younger sister, and Cho Thi Van, age 65, was a babysitter and longtime family acquaintance. With the victims' identities confirmed, the investigation moved into the next phase. That phase was to understand the stories behind each victim and identify what circumstances led to the tragedy. Lan Thi Mai Van 30 Nam's wife was described as a gentle, family-oriented Vietnamese woman. She married Le Nam in 2013 and had two young daughters, ages 5 and 2. She and her husband built a small nail salon named Envy Nail in Hazelhurst. As the eldest sibling in her family, Lan was trusted by relatives and often served as the bridge, helping family members reunite in the United States. Customers at Envy Nail adored her, describing her as warm, caring, and making everyone feel at home. No one could have imagined that this cheerful woman would meet such a tragic end at the hands of her own husband. Next was Le Thi Mai Van, Lan's younger sister, the youngest of the three female victims and a key figure connecting everyone present that day. From here on, we will refer to the sisters simply as Lan and Lei for clarity. At 28, Lei was preparing for a major milestone in her life, marriage. She had just become engaged to her longtime boyfriend Phung Min Le and planned to hold the wedding in 2019. She was described as kind, somewhat quiet, had immigrated through family sponsorship, and worked alongside her sister at the nail salon. Lei had a very good relationship with her brother-in-law, Le Nam. She called him An, showing respect as one would toward an elder brother. That made her death especially heartbreaking. Her passing just before her wedding added another layer of tragedy. She and her fiancé had not even taken official wedding photos. Their engagement picture had to be used as her memorial portrait at the community vigil. The only male victim was Phung Min Le, 28 Le's fiancé. Known affectionately as Joey, he was a Vietnamese American with a promising career at 28. At the time of the killings, Phung Min Le was a medical resident specializing in internal medicine at a hospital in Louisiana. He had been in a long-term, loving relationship with Le, supported wholeheartedly by both families. That fateful weekend, Phung drove from Louisiana to Mississippi to visit his fiancée and her family. No one knew it would be the last trip of his life. Those who knew him described him as intelligent, gentle, and deeply devoted to Le. The fact that a promising young doctor was killed in a domestic violence massacre left the public especially shaken. Phung Min Le had no blood relation to Le Nam, yet he was the only male victim. This led to many theories. Perhaps he tried to protect his fiancée and her family during the conflict and was killed in the process? Regardless of the exact cause, the death of Phung Min Le was a tremendous loss, not only to his family, but also to the medical community he worked in. And the final victim, also the oldest, Cho Thi Van, around 65 years old, was a trusted family acquaintance from Vietnam. She had lived in the United States for many years and was highly trusted by the Le Nam family. She often cared for the two young daughters while the couple worked at the nail salon. Neighbors saw her daily, but rarely interacted with her due to the language barrier. Cho Thi Van spoke almost no English. At her age, she should have been enjoying a peaceful retirement, yet she lost her life tragically in a domestic violence incident in a foreign land. 4 people with 4 different life stories, yet their fates became intertwined on one horrific night. They all shared one thing in common. They were kind people, loved by friends and by the Vietnamese community. Their relationship with the perpetrator, Le Nam, was clear. They were his family and close loved ones. This only deepened the mystery. What motive could drive Le Nam to kill those dearest to him? To answer that question, investigators had to look closely at Le Nam himself and the events leading up to the massacre. What police and the media later discovered about Le Nam was completely opposite to the terrifying image he projected that morning. Born in 1984, Le Nam was originally from the fishing village of An Bang in Vinh and Commune Phu Vang District, Thua Thien, Hue Province, today part of Hue City. Many people from An Bang later immigrated to the United States and built new lives there, including Nam's family. According to neighbors, Nam often said his family moved from a bigger city to Clinton around the early 2010s. Le Nam had a completely clean record, no criminal history, and held a stable job managing the nail salon with his wife. Their household situation was financially comfortable, which was why Nam and Lan were able to bring Lan's younger sister, Lei and Cho Thi Van, to the US to live with them shortly afterward. In the eyes of those around him, Le Nam was a devoted family man, gentle, polite, and friendly. He often bought pastries and coffee for customers as a gesture of hospitality. Within the Vietnamese friend circle, Nam had no bad reputation. He was known to occasionally help others. His medical records showed no sign of mental instability. He lived a healthy lifestyle, did not use illicit substances, and only drank occasionally for social or business purposes. So what could push a man who seemed to embody the ideal husband to kill the very people he loved? Immediately after the standoff ended, the Clinton Police Department, in coordination with the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, launched a full-scale investigation. Although Le Nam had been shot and killed at the scene, the investigation remained crucial to reconstruct the incident, determine his actions, and uncover the motive behind the massacre. The home on Fox Hill Drive became the center of an extensive forensic operation lasting several days, with crime scene technicians moving in and out continuously to collect evidence. Investigators initially determined that this was a brutal domestic violence incident that escalated into a hostage situation. There were no signs of an outside intruder. All evidence pointed to the homeowner, Le Nam, as the primary suspect. The chaotic scene, with numerous shell casings found around the bodies, helped investigators map out the shooting positions and bullet trajectories. All victims had been shot at close range, indicating that the perpetrator fired directly and decisively. The TV and lights were still on, and dishes remained on the dining table, signs that everyday life had been abruptly interrupted. There was no suicide note or written document left behind, nor any evidence of drug use, aside from a few empty beer cans near where Nam barricaded himself. These details suggested the crime may not have been premeditated, but instead triggered by sudden rage or emotional agitation. Forensic results indicated that the victims died around the same time between midnight and early morning on February 16, matching the time frame when police first received the emergency call. The scene showed no signs of prolonged struggle, implying that the victims were likely taken by surprise and had no chance to defend themselves. The forensic team also confirmed that all shell casings came from Nam's 9mm handgun, conclusively identifying him as the sole perpetrator with no accomplices. Alongside this, police extracted body cam footage from SWAT officers involved in the standoff. The footage documented parts of the tense 12-hour confrontation. Notably, when SWAT deployed a surveillance robot inside Le Nam's home, it recorded a chilling scene. The suspect sitting calmly on the living room floor near a window, cigarette in hand, weapon at his feet, and 4 lifeless bodies nearby. According to the police report, Le Nam even raised his middle finger at the robot, continuing to provoke law enforcement. Meanwhile, officers began interviewing neighbors. One neighbor, Al Morrison, provided a crucial lead. He said police had visited the home several times before to resolve disputes, suggesting that family conflict had been ongoing. His testimony aligned with police records. There had been at least 2 previous 911 calls to this address involving marital arguments and domestic disturbances. Although none were severe at the time, they showed the presence of long-standing tension in the household. This may be the key to understanding the motive. Could the massacre have been the breaking point of a prolonged string of domestic conflicts? Following that, Due to the extreme severity of the case, the FBI also joined to support the investigation, particularly in criminal behavior analysis. Experts reviewed Lanam's behavioral patterns and classified the case as a family annihilator scenario, a term for perpetrators, typically middle-aged men, who kill their entire families, often with histories of controlling behavior or domestic violence. In many such cases, the perpetrators experience psychological pressure or life disruptions that trigger an explosive outburst. Comparing this pattern with Lanam, although he had no major criminal history, the prior police visits reflected early signs of violence. This assessment placed the motive within the broader context that Lanam may have been someone skilled at hiding his true emotions, outwardly friendly, helpful, and sociable, but harboring dark and distorted thoughts. When these internal tensions reached a breaking point, he erupted and carried out the violent acts. This theory seemed plausible, but police still could not determine an exact motive. Marital conflict, jealousy, or financial pressure all remained unclear because the perpetrator was killed without leaving any explanation. To clarify further, the investigation shifted toward reviewing the family's financial situation and found that the nail salon was stable, with no significant debt. Regarding the marital situation, friends and relatives consistently stated that Lanam deeply loved his wife and children, and that Lon had shown no signs of wanting a divorce. After ruling out all other possibilities, investigators were left with one remaining explanation. Nam may have felt increasingly uncomfortable with his wife's extended family living in the same home, leading to prolonged tension. However, with all individuals directly involved in the case deceased, this hypothesis can never be fully confirmed. Although the exact motive could not be clearly established, investigators, through evidence collection and assistance from criminal psychology experts, were able to partially reconstruct the events leading up to the massacre. On the evening of Friday, the 15th of February 2019, after closing the Envy Nail Salon, the family Lanam, his wife Lan, his sister-in-law Lei, her fiancé Phung Min Lei, and Cho Thi Van all returned to their home in Clinton. They shared a warm early-year family dinner, chatting happily. Only Lanam remained unusually quiet, something dark slowly rising within him. Near midnight, Cho Thi Van put the two young girls to bed. In the living room, the adults continued talking until about 2 a.m., when an argument erupted. Years of suppressed anger inside Nam exploded. He reached for his 9mm handgun and began a brutal rampage. The first shot struck his wife at close range in the living room. Lan collapsed to the floor, blood soaking through her nightgown. Le screamed in terror. Phung Min Le rushed forward to stop his future brother-in-law, desperately trying to calm him, but was shot twice in succession. Seeing the two people she loved fall to the floor, Lei begged for mercy, but Nam continued pulling the trigger. In less than a minute, 3 beloved family members lay dead. The air grew thick with the smell of gunpowder. At that moment, Cho Thi Van rushed out of the children's bedroom, horrified by the scene. She tried to retreat to protect the two girls, but she too could not escape Nam's frenzy. Everything happened too fast under the cold-blooded rage of the gunman. Only when his two daughters woke up crying did Lanam momentarily regain control, but he could not face the horror he had created. The clock showed 2:30 a.m., and police were already arriving in response to an emergency call. One officer approached the door and asked about the situation inside. Nam slipped back into instability, pointed his weapon at the officers, and fired, forcing them to retreat, take cover, and call for backup. Nam slammed the door shut, locked it, pulled the curtains closed, and entered full barricade mode. He reloaded his gun and moved his daughters to a safer spot inside the house. Nam knew he could not escape, but lacked the courage to end his own life, choosing instead to go down in a violent standoff. Outside, reinforcements arrived. Clinton police were joined by the Hinds County Sheriff's Office and the Mississippi Highway Patrol SWAT team. The neighborhood was locked down, and curious residents were pushed back for safety. As dawn approached, the flashing blue and red lights of dozens of police vehicles turned quiet Fox Hill Drive into a scene resembling a war zone. Many later said they had never seen anything like it in their lives. Around 5 a.m., after police established their formation, a crisis negotiator was brought in to initiate contact with Nam, but he refused, forbidding police from entering. The negotiator attempted to prolong conversation in hopes of persuading him to release the hostages and surrender, as at this point, no one yet knew the condition of the 4 people inside. Nam did not hide anything, bluntly stating that the victims were no longer breathing. This admission left the police momentarily stunned. They shifted strategy, focusing on negotiating the release of the 2 girls and preparing for a tactical breach. The phone rang repeatedly as both sides continued negotiating. By around 10 a.m., seeing his daughters frightened and hungry, Nam finally softened. He demanded that police retreat to a distance and then slowly walked his 2 daughters toward the door. By 11 a.m., after cautiously surveying the surroundings, Lanam cracked the door open and allowed his 2 daughters to step outside and run toward police. The sight of the children being rescued safely brought a collective sigh of relief. They were immediately taken to a secure location for medical evaluation. Fortunately, both girls were only traumatized and had no physical injuries. Now, inside the home, only Lanam and the 4 lifeless bodies remained. Police were eager to breach, but they knew Nam was still armed. Negotiators continued urging him to surrender, but Nam was determined to fight until the end. After another hour passed, the incident commander authorized stronger tactics. First, they negotiated to send in the surveillance robot. The footage transmitted from inside left many officers chilled. Near the bodies, the rescue team saw Nam sitting in the middle of the room, raising his middle finger tauntingly and even firing shots at the robot, causing the camera feed to cut off. That action was the final straw. The patience afforded to the suspect had run out, and the rescue team was forced to implement the final plan: neutralize the gunman. As a last warning, they deployed tear gas. If Nam refused to surrender, he would expose his position. At 12:30 p.m., SWAT officers were ordered to prepare for a full breach. A sniper was positioned at an optimal angle, awaiting the command. And at the moment Nam moved toward the window to assess the situation, a single shot rang out. The sniper had taken the shot, penetrating the window and striking Nam in the chest, immediately incapacitating him. Orders were shouted, and SWAT teams stormed the house from 2 directions, one group breaking through the front door, the other entering through a window. They quickly scanned the scene, restrained the wounded Nam, and checked if anyone inside was still alive. Once the all-clear signal was given, medical teams and additional officers entered. After 12 exhausting hours, the intense standoff was finally over. Lanam was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but despite doctors' efforts, he succumbed to blood loss. With the sole suspect dead, the case closed without any courtroom trial and without any clear explanation for what triggered the tragedy. It left the public deeply haunted. At the time, the story drew significant media attention because it involved not only multiple fatalities, but also an immigrant Vietnamese family, a perspective rarely featured in American headlines. On television, images of the bullet-riddled home, the overturned furniture, and the memorial flowers and candles placed outside stirred emotional reactions across the community. This incident also left behind profound lessons. Above all, it highlighted the urgent issue of domestic violence, a crisis that can occur anywhere behind the closed doors of homes that appear peaceful from the outside. For many Vietnamese families who follow the belief, show the good, hide the bad, perhaps the signs of conflict and violence between Lanam and his family had surfaced long before, but were concealed out of pride, fear for the children, or worry for their reputation, until the tragedy finally erupted. At noon on the 5th of July, 2021, the San Antonio Police Department received an emergency call reporting a shooting at a nail salon called Cozy Nails Lounge. Less than 5 minutes after receiving the report, patrol units arrived at the scene in the parking area behind the salon. There, investigators documented 5 handgun shell casings scattered across the concrete, forming an arc around the spot where the victim fell. In addition, a large pool of blood was still smeared on the ground and trailed all the way to the back door sign, suggesting that someone had tried to support or move the victim. Earlier, an ambulance had rushed the victim to the hospital in critical condition. However, due to massive blood loss, he did not survive. The first witnesses at the scene were in extreme shock. In trembling voices, they tried to recount the incident as completely as they could. According to them, not long before the shooting, the nail salon was still operating normally and bustling as usual. Suddenly, a heated argument erupted between 2 men. Not wanting to cause a disturbance that might affect customers, the 2 decided to head to the back area to continue settling their dispute. Just a few minutes later, sharp, explosive sounds rang out about 5 to 6 dry gunshots in rapid succession. Hearing the commotion, everyone inside the salon immediately ran out to the alley behind the business to see what was happening. There, a haunting sight appeared before them. One of the two men who had been arguing moments earlier was now collapsed on the ground, his shirt soaked through with blood. Meanwhile, the younger man still stood frozen in place, gripping a handgun that was still smoking. Witnessing the tragedy, a woman screamed at the top of her lungs. It was Stacy Nguyen, the wife of the victim, Ryan Vaugh. And what was even more devastating was that the gunman was none other than her own younger brother, Nguyen Tuan Kiet. Hearing her mother's cries, the teenage daughter rushed over as well. She dropped to her knees and held her mother, who was nearly fainting, while her terrified eyes never left her father's motionless body. Right after that, an employee at the salon managed to steady themselves and called 911 to report the shooting. Taking advantage of the chaos, the suspect hurriedly fled the scene, leaving behind frantic screams for help. The initial information shocked police because this was not a random attack by a stranger, it was the outcome of a family conflict that had escalated to a breaking point. The next crucial lead emerged through the security camera system behind the building. After extracting the footage, police were able to piece together the entire sequence of events. According to the video, while Ryan and Kiet were locked in an intense argument near the salon's back door, Kiet suddenly pulled a handgun from his pants pocket, aimed it directly at his brother-in-law, and fired 5 to 6 shots at close range. As Ryan clutched his chest and collapsed, Kiet still did not stop and continued firing into the victim. After the shooting, Kiet stood there and shouted loudly, spewing agitated, emotional words. At that moment, Stacy opened the door and ran outside, only to be horrified to see her brother holding a gun beside her husband's fallen body. The camera footage showed Kiet turning to yell at his sister with an expression of extreme rage, then quickly leaving the scene. This raw, real-time video became the key evidence that helped investigators identify the suspect and understand exactly what he had done. Police immediately issued a region-wide manhunt for Nguyen Tuan Kiet. Based on witness statements and camera footage from the parking lot, authorities quickly determined the description of the vehicle the suspect used to escape. Less than an hour after the shooting, police spotted the suspect vehicle traveling near the intersection of Loop 410 and Blanco Road, only a few miles from the scene. A rapid takedown was launched. Kiet was apprehended without resistance, and at the time of his arrest, he still had a loaded Glock handgun tucked into his waistband. According to the case file, the victim, Ryan Vaugh, 46 years old, was a Vietnamese-American man who had lived in the United States for many years. He had a happy home with his wife Stacy Nguyen and their teenage daughter. In the eyes of friends and neighbors, Ryan was always seen as a calm, hardworking man who devoted himself to his family. With the dream of building something of their own in a foreign land, the couple decided to open a nail salon called Cozy Nails Lounge. In fact, the business was originally founded with capital contributed by Stacy and her younger brother, Nguyen Tuan Kiet. Although Ryan was not directly involved in the initial investment, he helped his wife manage and operate the salon, so he was also regarded as a co-owner. In the past, Ryan had a fairly close relationship with his brother-in-law. They treated each other like family and trusted one another completely in business, working together to grow the family salon. However, once the business began to run smoothly, underlying tensions also started to surface. Because he was older, Ryan often played the leading role in the salon's major decisions. This made Kiet feel that his brother-in-law was pushing him to the sidelines in business decisions, and that profits were not being divided fairly. Although on the surface, both men tried to keep the peace for the sake of the family, deep down, a significant rift gradually formed between them over money. According to relatives, Ryan never wanted to pick a fight with his brother-in-law, but he was also firm in protecting the interests of himself and his wife. The fateful argument on the 5th of July, 2021 was one of the rare occasions when Ryan and Kiet confronted each other directly and tragically. It was also the last. Ryan became the unlucky victim in the very place where the family had once placed so many hopes. His death left unbearable pain for his wife and daughter, and plunged an entire extended family into a devastating tragedy. Right after arresting the suspect, Nguyen Tuan Kiet, that same afternoon, police immediately conducted an interrogation to determine the motive. At the station, Kiet initially kept his head down and remained silent in front of the recording camera. However, after several hours of intense psychological pressure, the 42-year-old man began to speak through sobs, telling the story from his own point of view. Kiet confessed that the reason he came to the salon that day was entirely about money. According to his statement, he and his fiancée had put up as much as 30,000 USD in capital, along with months of hard work to help build Cozy Nails Lounge. But once the salon became stable, Kiet felt he had been pushed out. Specifically, he claimed that his brother-in-law Ryan and his sister Stacy owed him a significant amount of money. Moreover, he said he not only received no share of the profits, but also had no voice at all in managing the salon. Kiet's position was clear. The original business partnership was only between him and his sister, so if his brother-in-law had not invested any capital, there was no reason he should receive an equal share of the benefits. This made Kiet feel betrayed, especially because his own sister did not take his side. Even so, for many months, he chose to endure it quietly and had never displayed any violent behavior. By noon on the 5th of July, 2021, Kiet arrived at the nail salon with a loaded Glock tucked into his waistband. According to his statement, his only goal was to demand the return of his invested money so he could withdraw from the business. Kiet insisted that he only wanted an honest, straightforward conversation and had never planned in advance to take his brother-in-law's life. However, bringing a firearm with him showed that Kiet had anticipated the confrontation would be extremely tense. In fact, the moment he came face to face with Ryan inside the salon, the two began arguing loudly. Ryan firmly stated that the nail salon was jointly owned by 3 people, and therefore the invested profits could not be repaid immediately. Their back and forth made the atmosphere suffocating in front of customers, forcing them to move to the back area to settle the dispute. And it was there that Kiet's long-suppressed anger finally exploded when he felt his brother-in-law was dismissing his demand. Unable to remain calm, Kiet yanked out the Glock. In an instant, what had been a verbal argument turned into violence as he fired directly at his brother-in-law. The first bullet struck Ryan in the left side of the chest, causing him to collapse immediately. But the rage had robbed Kiet of all self-control. He pulled the trigger another 5 to 6 times, unloading into his brother-in-law as he lay on the ground. Forensic findings showed that Ryan was hit a total of 5 times, including 2 fatal wounds that pierced the heart and lungs. When the gunshot stopped, Kiet stood there, breathing hard, staring blankly down at his brother-in-law's motionless body. Seeing someone he had once been close to now lying in a pool of blood, Kiet may have begun to come to his senses, horrified by the terrible consequences of what he had just done. At that moment, Stacy ran out and screamed in despair. Camera footage shows that Kiet managed to shout something at his sister, words heavy with resentment and blame, before quickly turning and fleeing. Leaving the scene in a state of turmoil, Kiet drove aimlessly through the streets. Perhaps his mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, fear, regret, and a bitterness that still had not faded. Not long after, Kiet was stopped and arrested by police while he was still lingering near the area of the crime scene. At the station, when investigators informed him that Ryan had died from the severity of his wounds, Kiet froze, then collapsed into sobs. His demeanor gradually shifted from anger to belated remorse. He repeatedly insisted he had not meant to do it, claiming everything happened because a moment of rage made him lose control. According to the family, before the tragedy, Kiet had no criminal record and a completely clean background. Relatives described him as quiet and gentle. Investing in Cozy Nails Lounge had taken up most of Kiet's savings, so it is understandable that he became upset when he felt the returns were not matching what he had put in. At the same time, physical evidence continued to strengthen the case file. Forensic testing showed that the Glock 17 recovered from the suspect matched the 9mm shell casings found at the scene. In particular, the security cameras provided undeniable footage of the shooting. Witnesses, including the victim's wife and child, were also prepared to testify about earlier conflicts, as well as Kiet's flight after the attack. On the 24th of September, 2021, a grand jury in Bexar County formally indicted Nguyen Tuan Kiet on a charge of murder, along with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon because the reckless gunfire could have endangered others nearby. With clear evidence, the case was quickly scheduled to proceed to a public trial. The case of Nguyen Tuan Kiet shooting his brother-in-law Ryan Va sent shockwaves through the local community, especially among Vietnamese-owned businesses in San Antonio. After more than 2 years in pretrial detention while legal procedures were completed, Kit's trial finally took place in late August 2023 at the Bexar County Courthouse. At first, Kit was charged with first-degree murder, facing a sentencing range under Texas law from 5 years in prison up to life. The trial drew a large crowd, including relatives from both families and many curious members of the Vietnamese community who came to observe. However, something unexpected happened on the very first day of trial, on the 21st of August, 2023. Right after jury selection and the swearing-in process were completed, Kit suddenly pleaded guilty before the prosecution even had the chance to read the indictment. The move stunned the entire courtroom, from the judge to the attorneys on both sides. In response, the judge required the jury to step out and question Kit directly, to confirm whether he truly understood that pleading guilty meant giving up his right to a trial. Kit answered clearly yes, and affirmed that his decision was entirely voluntary. With the defendant admitting guilt, the court immediately moved into the sentencing phase. The jury was called back with a new task: to hear the arguments from both sides and then decide Kit's sentence within the range of 5 to 99 years in prison or life. In opening statements for sentencing, prosecutors asked for a very harsh punishment near the maximum, or even life in prison. They argued that Kit acted with deliberate cruelty by firing multiple shots into an unarmed victim who had no ability to defend himself. The defense attorney, while not denying his client's wrongdoing, pleaded with the jury to understand the circumstances Kit was in at the time. He emphasized that Kit had not planned to take the victim's life beforehand, and that the gun he carried was only meant for self-defense or intimidation if necessary. He also argued that Kit had lived as a model citizen for years, with a spotless record and no history of violence. Finally, the defense asked the jury to consider that Kit acted while in a highly agitated mental state due to provocation. Under Texas law, that factor can reduce the punishment range to 2 to 20 years in prison. The trial lasted many days, with extensive testimony to clarify this family's complicated background. When called to the witness stand, Stacy Nguyen, the victim's wife, held back her pain and recounted what had happened. She stated that her younger brother had never truly held the authority of the salon's owner, and that every major decision required the unified agreement of all three people. Stacy also completely denied the allegation that Kit had not been paid. She explained that because Kit had not submitted the income and expense reports, the family had no basis to calculate and pay his wages. At the same time, she insisted there was no possibility that Kit had spent more than $20,000 USD without anyone knowing. In her view, the entire initial investment agreement had been clearly and transparently settled among all three parties. However, an unexpected development occurred when Stacy's own mother, Thuy Nguyen, and her older brother, Vu Nguyen, stepped forward to support Kit's testimony. They testified in court that from the beginning, everyone had agreed that Kit would contribute capital only on the condition that his brother-in-law Ryan would not be involved in the partnership. Vu even revealed that he had previously discussed repaying Kit's investment with Stacy, and that he himself was willing to contribute additional money to pay his younger brother back. Watching close relatives clash bitterly in the courtroom made the atmosphere heavier than ever. After hearing all arguments and evidence from both sides, the jury began deliberations. 6 hours passed in anxious suspense. Finally, the jury returned with its official decision. Instead of a life sentence, as many had initially predicted, the jury accepted the view that Kit's actions were a sudden outburst triggered in the moment, rather than a calculated plan to take a life. On the 28th of August, 2023, the court formally sentenced Nguyen Tuan Kit to 15 years in a Texas state prison. This sentence was significantly lower than the 20-year maximum for a sudden passion offense, and far below the life term the prosecution had previously requested. When he heard the sentence, Kit lowered his head and broke down, sobbing. In the gallery, Kit's family breathed a sigh of relief that their loved one had avoided the harshest punishment. In contrast, the victim's wife and child could only sit in stunned silence, facing a sentence they felt did not match the magnitude of their loss. Immediately after the sentence was announced, the court invited members of the victim's family to speak. Ryan's daughter stood up trembling and faced her uncle. Through tears, she choked out that it was her uncle who had taken her father's life, and that all the beautiful memories of family had suddenly collapsed in an instant. The child's words, like a blade to the heart, fell over the courtroom in silence. Kit hurriedly wiped his tears and tried to look toward his niece to offer a belated apology, but she turned away and walked out with her mother. And so, the case officially ended with a 15-year prison sentence for Nguyen Tuan Kiet. His attorney also said that his client accepted the punishment and did not intend to appeal. The tragedy at Cozy Nails Lounge is a sobering warning about how family conflicts in business are handled. The case shocked not only the Vietnamese community in San Antonio, but also the broader American public, because it showed that anyone can become a perpetrator when anger overwhelms humanity. From the moment the incident happened until the sentencing, local media continued to provide constant updates. Many people expressed sorrow for a Vietnamese family that had once been close-knit, only to be torn apart overnight by disputes involving money. One especially controversial point in public discussion was the 15-year prison sentence for such a brutal taking of a life. While many believe the sentence was far too lenient because the jury showed sympathy toward the defendant, others felt the punishment was heavy enough to deter similar crimes. Under Texas law, for an offense committed in a provoked, emotionally agitated state, the maximum sentence is only 20 years rather than life. The fact that the jury did not apply the highest sentencing range suggests they believed Kiet was not a cold-blooded killer, but someone who committed the crime in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Even so, 15 years is still a steep price to pay. Now, he will have a great deal of time behind bars to repent for his impulsive act. Beyond that, this case also sounded an alarm about gun violence and the way conflicts are resolved in American society. A business dispute like this could have been negotiated or settled through legal channels. Yet, having a weapon in hand pushed Kiet toward a violent solution, resulting in an irreversible tragedy. At 8:43 in the morning on September 25th, 2017, the 911 call center received a call from a man. On the other end, his trembling voice stuttered as he vaguely said, "My wife didn't make it," and that he needed help. Despite the fragmented explanation, the dispatcher understood that a serious situation was unfolding and immediately sent police officers and medical personnel to the address on West 61st Street. When authorities arrived, the caller was already standing outside, waiting, his face pale with shock. He led the officers down to the basement bathroom and choked out the words that his wife was no longer breathing. Who had done this terrible thing? What exactly had happened that morning? To answer these questions, aside from the caller's statement, the forensic and crime scene teams needed to step in to collect every objective clue with the highest precision. Inside the house, even the most seasoned investigators were stunned by the scene. The woman's body lay curled up in the shower, her head leaning against the corner beneath the shower head as if she had been trying to shrink away from violence. Around her neck was a dark purple ligature mark, consistent with the size of a thin electrical cord like a phone charger cable. Indeed, a phone charging cable was found discarded on the floor next to the victim's body, a silent witness to the crime that had occurred. The cramped bathroom showed signs of a struggle. A few bottles of shampoo and personal items had fallen, and the shower curtain was pushed aside. Everything suggested that the victim had fought desperately to escape when she was suddenly attacked. There were no signs of forced entry or missing belongings. Thus, robbery or an intruder could be ruled out. All suspicion pointed towards someone inside the household. To investigators, finding a wife dead in her own bathroom with signs of violence was a classic indicator of a domestic homicide, and this time the suspect was present at the scene. Police quickly secured the area, photographed the scene, and collected evidence. The phone charger cable was sealed for forensic analysis. The victim's body was taken in by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner for autopsy to determine the precise cause and time of death. Meanwhile, the caller was invited to the station for questioning. Shortly after the police arrived, the identities of both the victim and the suspect were clearly established. The woman found in the bathroom was Mai Wong Huing Trong, also known as Michelle, 48 years old, a petite but strong Vietnamese woman who lived and worked in Minnesota with her husband. They had 2 grown sons. Michelle was described by her friends as a devoted wife, caring mother, and a successful businesswoman in the community. Around 2013, the couple opened Pen Nails Spa in the city of Richfield. With her skillful techniques and friendly demeanor, Michelle quickly built a large base of loyal customers. Many clients adored her so much that they followed her from salon to salon, eventually becoming regulars when she opened her own shop. Beyond her business, Michelle was also remembered for her generous heart and her talent for traditional Vietnamese cooking. She often invited friends and longtime customers to her home to enjoy Vietnamese meals she prepared herself. In her family, Michelle was the nurturing figure who loved her husband and 2 sons deeply. Friends said she was especially proud of her boys and dedicated a great deal of time to raising and guiding them. Michelle's husband, the man who made the emergency call, was Tony Le, a 55-year-old Vietnamese-American who was born in Vietnam before immigrating to the United States in the 1990s. Throughout their 20 years of marriage, Tony fulfilled the role of husband and father in a typical immigrant household. He and his wife built Pen Nails Spa together and was respected by friends and coworkers for his hardworking nature. Many acquaintances said Tony was a quiet, reserved man who rarely socialized outside of work and family. With such background information, no one would have expected a homicide to occur in this family. They had no known enemies, nor were there signs of burglary. What hidden truth lay behind this tragedy? Minneapolis police, in collaboration with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, immediately launched a thorough investigation. Soon, promising findings from the forensic and crime scene teams helped unravel the mystery. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner concluded that the victim died from asphyxiation caused by ligature strangulation. Specifically, the hyoid bone in her neck was fractured and the soft tissues around the trachea were hemorrhaged, classic signs of pressure applied by a tightening object. There were no other fatal injuries, indicating the killer did not use additional weapons. The time of death was early dawn on September 25th. Moreover, the forensic report noted fibers and skin particles under the victim's fingernails, likely from the suspect's clothing or skin. This proved she fought fiercely before collapsing. These findings matched the scratch marks found on Tony Le, strengthening the theory of a struggle inside the bathroom. Further forensic analysis showed that the phone charging cable, the suspected murder weapon, contained DNA from both the victim and Tony Le. Among the evidence collected at the scene, one document drew particular attention from investigators. Michelle's divorce petition, prepared and ready to be filed with the court. This crucial clue pointed toward a potential motive. The proposed theory was that the couple's marriage was far less harmonious than it appeared, and Michelle's intent to pursue a divorce may have triggered Tony Le's violent jealousy. It sounded plausible, but to confirm it, investigators still needed a confession from the suspect himself. At the investigative office, Tony Le initially remained silent, but within minutes he broke down in tears and began confessing everything. In his first statement, Tony said that he and his wife had a heated argument earlier that dawn. He admitted that he had lost control out of rage and jealousy when his wife mentioned wanting to end the marriage. Tony recounted in detail how he followed her into the bathroom, grabbed the nearby iPhone charging cable, looped it around her neck from behind, and pulled tightly. After committing the act, Tony panicked, drove to his sister's house to confess everything, and then called the police. His entire statement was recorded, transcribed, and signed voluntarily. This became a powerful confession, as the suspect admitted guilt without coercion. However, to complete the full picture, investigators still needed testimonies from additional witnesses. Tony Le's sister confirmed that early on September 25th, her brother had come banging on her door in a frantic state before confessing to harming his wife. She added that Tony had always been a calm husband, but recently showed signs of stress and jealousy, suspecting his wife of infidelity. The victim's son told investigators that his mother had wanted a divorce for some time. He said his parents often argued about the business and finances of the nail salon. Notably, he confirmed that his mother had met with a divorce lawyer a few days earlier. Close friends of the victim were also interviewed. They said Michelle had confided that she had a new boyfriend and planned to leave her husband, though her friends were unsure how true it was. These statements aligned with what Tony Le claimed on the night of the incident, that Michelle told him she had a new partner and was going to leave him. Thus, the motive of jealousy and fear of losing his wife became quite clear. Additionally, police reviewed neighborhood security footage to confirm external details. A neighbor's camera captured Michelle driving home at around 3:15 in the morning on September 25th, with her car's headlights turning into the driveway. Not long after, the camera recorded Tony Le leaving the house at around 4 o'clock, likely when he went to his sister's home. There were no signs of any unfamiliar person nearby at that time. This perfectly matched Tony's confession. Furthermore, the victim's phone was examined, showing an unsent message draft to a friend from the night of September 24th. In it, Michelle wrote, "He is too jealous. I'm exhausted." Although the message was never sent, the data remained on the device, helping reveal her emotional state shortly before the tragedy. During the investigation, Tony Lay's attorney hired a psychological expert to assess his mental condition. The aim was to determine whether Tony had committed the act under severe emotional distress. The psychological evaluation concluded that Tony did not suffer from any severe mental illness, but did show signs of acute emotional disturbance. Specifically, at the moment of the crime, he entered a state of jealousy-driven frenzy, losing control for a short period of time. The expert noted that this was not a premeditated attack, but an impulsive one. However, under Minnesota law, this factor could not exonerate him. Police also acknowledged Tony's remorse and briefly considered whether the incident could have been an accident, but given the clear confession and forensic evidence, that possibility was swiftly ruled out. All clues pointed toward one single scenario, that Tony Lay, consumed by jealousy, killed his wife in the bathroom during the early hours of September 25th, 2017. From the suspect's confession, witness statements, and extensive forensic evidence, police were able to reconstruct the full sequence of the crime. On September 24, 2017, Michelle left the Pen Nails Spa Salon late in the afternoon. She decided to attend a small gathering with a few friends to lift her spirits. At that time, Michelle was emotionally torn. She had met with a divorce attorney 3 days earlier and planned to have a definitive conversation with her husband about ending the marriage. At the gathering, there were reports that Michelle had met a male friend she felt drawn to, possibly the new boyfriend she mentioned to others. Although the relationship was only beginning, Michelle was ready for an independent life after marriage. That night, she gathered all her courage to tell Tony the truth. As for Tony Lay, he was home alone that night. Tony knew his wife was attending a gathering and felt uneasy and suspicious. In recent days, Michelle often came home late and barely spoke to him, making Tony sense something was wrong. Ever since her recent trip to Vietnam, he felt she had become increasingly distant. In the quiet house, Tony sat waiting, his mind spinning with jealous thoughts where his wife was, who she was with, and why she still had not returned. Every ticking second on the clock only fueled the simmering fire of jealousy inside him. At around 3:15 in the morning on September 25th, 2017, headlights flashed outside the window. Michelle returned home later than usual. She gently opened the door, hoping her husband was asleep. But Tony Lay was still awake, sitting in the dark living room. Within minutes, the couple began arguing, their voices rising rapidly. Tony confronted his wife about what she had been hiding and whether she had someone else, which would explain her strange behavior recently. At that moment, Michelle decided to tell the truth. She openly said she no longer wanted to continue the marriage, that she had someone new, and she was ready to end the relationship. Those words stunned Tony. In an instant, rage, pain, and jealousy exploded inside the 55-year-old man. It was now 3:30 in the morning. After hearing her declaration, Tony rushed toward Michelle, his face tightened with anger, screaming and accusing her of betrayal. Terrified, Michelle ran into the basement bathroom and locked the door to escape her husband's fury. The small bathroom became her temporary refuge. Inside, Michelle stood trembling, her heart pounding. Outside, Tony furiously pounded on the door, screaming in a jealous frenzy. Losing control, he looked around for anything he could use to break in or restrain her. On the shelf near the bathroom door, he noticed Michelle's cell phone plugged in to charge. A thought flashed through his mind. Tony yanked the phone charger from the outlet. It was a thin cable, about 1 meter long, with 2 small plastic connectors. Ironically, a device meant for connection and communication was about to become a weapon to take a life. Inside the bathroom, Michelle heard the noise and cracked the door open to check. Suddenly, Tony shoved the door wide open. Standing before her was a man she barely recognized, eyes bloodshot, face twisted in rage, holding a cable in his hand. Michelle panicked and tried to escape, but it was too late. Tony Lay charged at her like a wild beast, using his strength to wrap the charging cable around her neck from behind. She tried to scream, but her voice was cut off as her windpipe was compressed. In less than a minute, Michelle's resistance weakened and then ceased entirely. She collapsed onto the bathroom floor, her body curled up in the corner of the shower. Only when Michelle lay motionless did Tony loosen his grip, letting the cable fall onto the cold tile floor. Around him, personal items were scattered, and the mirror was smudged with small streaks of blood from scratches on Tony's hand. A chilling silence filled the room. The frenzy dissipated, and Tony Lay stood panting, staring blankly at his wife's lifeless body. In his mind, he still seemed unable to comprehend what he had just done. At 3:40 in the morning, Tony Lay finally snapped out of his daze. Seeing the horrifying scene he had caused, he collapsed beside his wife's body. He shook her desperately, calling out to her in vain. As the realization of what he had done hit him, Tony was consumed by both fear and remorse. He began sobbing uncontrollably, shedding tears that came far too late. In that moment, the 55-year-old man understood he had lost everything because of a single moment of madness. Realizing his wife was gone, Tony struggled to decide what to do next. For a brief moment, the thought of ending his own life flashed through his mind as he stared at the charger cable. But then Tony thought of his children. In the end, he decided to turn himself in. First, he needed emotional support, and the first person he thought of was his older sister, the only family member living nearby. At around 4 in the morning, Tony Lay left the house and drove a few blocks to her home. He rang the doorbell, dazed, with small bloodstains still on his clothes. When his sister opened the door, Tony immediately lunged toward her, hugging her tightly and breaking down in confession. At first, she believed he was speaking in panic and not thinking clearly. But when Tony fell to his knees begging for forgiveness, she realized this was a horrifying truth. The siblings held each other and cried in anguish. Once she regained her composure, Tony's sister urged him to call the police. After several hours of calming down and gathering courage, at nearly 8:30 in the morning, Tony Lay picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. That fateful call alerted authorities to his wife's death, marking the beginning of the legal process. By 8:43, Minneapolis police arrived at the scene and arrested Tony Lay. With sufficient evidence in hand, on September 26, 2017, just one day after the incident, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office officially charged Tony Lay. The indictment stated clearly that he had intentionally caused his wife's death and emphasized jealousy over her desire for a divorce as the motive. Bail was set by the district court at $1.5 million USD, reflecting the severity of the crime. Tony Lay was held at the county jail awaiting trial. His trial was held at the Hennepin County District Court. Due to the clarity of the case and his confession, prosecutors did not pursue a higher charge. However, the proposed sentence remained extremely harsh. The Office of Prosecutor Mike Freeman recommended a sentence of 306 months, equivalent to 25 years and 6 months, based on Minnesota's sentencing guidelines. In January 2019, Tony Lay unexpectedly changed course and chose to plead guilty instead of going to trial. During the plea hearing on January 10th, 2019, Tony Lay responded through an interpreter, admitting responsibility for his wife's death. This plea eliminated the need for a jury trial and allowed the court to move directly to sentencing. Tony's defense attorney, Ryan Gary, explained that they initially planned to argue a crime committed in a moment of emotional heat in hopes of reducing the charge to manslaughter. However, Tony insisted on pleading guilty, saying he wanted both families to suffer less. Perhaps after more than a year in jail, his conscience awakened enough to push him to face the truth and accept responsibility. The sentencing hearing took place on February 12, 2019. The atmosphere in the courtroom was filled with sorrow and outrage. Representatives of the victim's family were allowed to speak in court. One by one, they tearfully described the tragic woman they had lost. A niece who called Michelle D pleaded through sobs for the court to impose the harshest possible sentence to bring justice for her aunt. The victim's brother also firmly insisted that Tony must pay a deserving price. Hearing their words, Tony Lay lowered his head, his shoulders trembling. He too was given a chance to speak his final words. In a short statement, Tony tearfully spoke in Vietnamese, expressing profound remorse and apologizing to his wife's family and his children. He said he loved his wife deeply but lost control, and that he would live with regret for the rest of his life. Several of Tony's relatives and friends submitted 16 letters requesting leniency, describing him as a good husband in the past and saying this act was an unusual outburst. The defense attorney used these letters to request mercy, asking for a 15-year sentence and arguing that Tony's actions were less severe than a typical second-degree murder. However, prosecutors and investigators strongly rejected this view. They emphasized that Tony Lay strangled his wife to death in a brutal manner, something far beyond a momentary loss of control. The prosecution pointed out that the prolonged pressure required to make the victim lose consciousness demonstrated clear intent to kill, not an accident. Moreover, after Michelle collapsed, Tony did not provide aid or call for help. Immediately, he left for several hours, showing utter disregard after the crime. Sitting on the prosecution's side, many members of the victim's family shook their heads upon hearing the defense's plea. They believed Tony deserved the full punishment for his cruel actions. After hearing both sides, Judge Jay Quam entered deliberation before returning with the verdict. He announced that the court accepted the defendant's guilty plea to second-degree murder and would issue a sentence within the guideline range, with certain considerations. Judge Quam stated that Tony Lay's actions were extremely serious, but the court also recognizes his acceptance of responsibility and lack of prior criminal history. Ultimately, the court sentenced Tony Lay to 261 months in prison, equivalent to approximately 21 years and 9 months. This was the lowest end of the sentencing guideline for this charge. Upon hearing the sentence, Tony Lay burst into tears, while the victim's family appeared somewhat disappointed, believing the punishment was still too lenient. The judge explained that he had considered Tony's remorse and clean record, so he did not choose the highest penalty. Even so, it remained a very severe sentence. At nearly 60 years old, Tony Lay would spend most of the rest of his life behind bars. Under Minnesota law, he must serve 2/3 of the sentence in prison, about 14 to 15 years, before being eligible for supervised release for the remaining 1/3. Since Tony had been held in custody since 2017, that time would be credited toward his sentence. He is expected to remain in prison at least until around 2032 before he may be eligible for release. After the sentencing, Tony Lay appealed for a reduced sentence, arguing that 21 years was too harsh for what he claimed was an act committed in a moment of anger. However, in February 2020, the Minnesota Court of Appeals upheld the original sentence, affirming that the punishment imposed on Tony Lay was appropriate and not excessive. The appellate court emphasized that the severity of Tony's actions was comparable to other malicious homicide cases. With this ruling, Tony Lay's legal journey effectively came to an end. He must now serve the sentence handed down, with no further path of appeal. The case of Tony Lay concluded with a just punishment for the perpetrator, but its echoes continue to shock the Vietnamese community in Minneapolis. It was a heartbreaking family tragedy, the victim, a gentle wife who endured much emotional suffering, and the perpetrator, a husband consumed by jealousy who destroyed everything. On social media and in local news outlets, the story was widely shared as a stark reminder of the dangers of hidden domestic violence. Many readers expressed sorrow for Michelle, a beloved woman who contributed to her community, yet ultimately died at the hands of the person who should have protected her. The incident also reignited discussions about jealousy, control, and cultural dynamics within marriage. Some argued that the lingering mindset of a husband's authority over his wife in certain Asian households can fuel disaster when a man cannot accept his wife's independence or desire for divorce. At around 6:30 p.m. on the 28th of July, 2022, Joe's Nails and Spa in West Virginia was cleaning up to prepare to close after a day of work. Inside, a few staff members and regular customers were still lingering and chatting. But everything instantly turned into chaos when sharp gunshots suddenly erupted. One employee screamed in horror after seeing the owner, Cuyen Van Lay, and his wife, Phi An Lay, collapse to the floor with severe injuries. Everyone else, both staff and customers, fell into extreme panic. Some looked for a place to hide, while others tried desperately to run outside. In that terrifying moment, a coworker of the victims quickly pulled out a phone and called 911, crying and screaming as they reported the attack. The chaos quickly spilled over to the Mexican restaurant La Carreta next door as the gunshots carried through. The restaurant owner immediately shouted, telling diners to get down low to avoid stray bullets. The scene at the Merchant Walk shopping area was instantly swallowed by fear. People rushed to find cover while others trembled as they called their loved ones. Crying echoed everywhere as people gradually realized an active shooting was unfolding right beside them. Less than 3 minutes after the emergency call, Summersville City Police arrived at the scene. They entered with weapons in hand, prepared for the most dangerous scenario. The first sight that hit law enforcement was 2 bodies lying motionless on the floor of Joe's Nails and Spa. All around them, everything looked like a horror movie set. Belongings were scattered everywhere, and shattered nail polish bottles smeared across the floor in haunting patches of color. The air was thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder, signaling that a tragedy had just occurred. Even more terrifying, nearby the perpetrator was still standing rigidly, clutching the weapon, his face blank and dazed like a man who had lost his soul. The lucky survivors could only huddle and hide in a corner, holding their breath as they watched every development in sheer terror. In that life-or-death instant, the officers had to confront the gunman directly. He showed no intention of surrendering. According to the scene report, the gun in his hand was still loaded and ready to fire, making the situation extremely dangerous. Immediately, 2 Somersville officers shouted for him to drop the weapon, but he seemed not to respond. Instead, witnesses said he aimed the gun toward law enforcement. Facing an imminent threat, the 2 officers had no choice but to open fire to stop the suspect. In a split second, the man was hit and collapsed to the floor right beside the 2 victims. The scene was brought under control at once. Police quickly kicked the weapon away and restrained the suspect to ensure he could no longer pose a danger. At that moment, although badly wounded, he still showed signs of life. Medical personnel who had been waiting outside were immediately brought in to provide emergency aid to both the victims and the attacker. However, the worst outcome occurred. Because their injuries were too severe, the 2 victims could not be saved and died at the scene. The suspect was rushed to the nearby Somersville Regional Medical Center for emergency treatment, but due to the extent of his injuries, he also did not survive and was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly afterward. In just a few short minutes, the shooting left 3 people dead, including the perpetrator, shocking the entire town. Officers immediately sealed off the nail salon and the Merchants Walk parking lot and notified the West Virginia State Police to coordinate the investigation. Key evidence was quickly documented: a semi-automatic handgun lying on the floor and multiple shell casings scattered around the victim's area, indicating that several shots had been fired. Apart from the 2 unfortunate victims, 4 other people inside the salon were lucky to escape and suffered no injuries. All of them were in extreme shock, with several breaking down in tears after witnessing such a horrifying tragedy. Based on on-site witness accounts, police identified the sole perpetrator as Patrick Wayne Cater, 52 years old, an employee at Joe's Nails and Spa. When they heard this, even seasoned investigators at the salon that night could not hide their surprise. It turned out this was not a typical robbery, nor a random attack by a stranger. The perpetrator and the victims knew each other, they had even worked together. The scene suggested the suspect had targeted only the salon owner couple, because the money and property in the salon were left untouched and everyone else was unharmed. This raised an initial hypothesis. Could this have been a deliberate personal execution driven by a private conflict? The question, why did Patrick do it, became the biggest mystery investigators needed to unravel in the days that followed. Alongside the crime scene examination, police also worked to verify the victims' identities and backgrounds. From witness accounts, they learned that Nguyen Van Le and Phi An Le were a Vietnamese couple dearly loved by the Somersville community. Nguyen was born in 1977 and Phi An was born in 1982 in Vietnam. They married and then immigrated to the United States to build a new life. After years of hard work, they established a small home in Somersville, West Virginia, a remote but peaceful place. The family's main source of income came from Joe's Nails and Spa. Both were hardworking, skillful, and friendly nail technicians, and thanks to that, Joe's Nails steadily built a large base of loyal customers. They had 2 young children, Alexla 12 years old and Alexla 11 years old, 2 sweet, well-behaved kids whom the couple adored. What was especially admirable was that even while living far from home, the family maintained traditional Vietnamese routines. On weekends, they went to the temple together, the children learned Vietnamese, and they took part in community activities in nearby areas. Those who knew them also remarked that the couple were kind-hearted people, always willing to help those around them. They worked hard and saved up, hoping to give their children a bright future and the best educational opportunities in the United States. At Joe's Nails, Nguyen often handled customers and provided nail care services for male clients, while Phi An was known for her intricate nail art, making her especially popular with female clients. Local customers loved them not only for their excellent skills, but also for their warm, sincere manner. In the community, the couple were also known as sociable, well-connected people. They often participated in local church charity events and had never had conflicts with anyone. That was why the sudden news of their deaths left everyone stunned, as if struck by lightning. Many people could hardly believe it was real, because they could not imagine who could be so ruthless as to harm such a decent couple. For the family, the shock was overwhelming and abrupt. Cuyen and Phi An's bodies were later taken to Blue Ridge Funeral Home in the city of Beckley for arrangements. A solemn Buddhist funeral was held in early August 2022, attended by many members of the Vietnamese community in West Virginia. A heavy atmosphere of grief filled the service as the two coffins lay side by side, surrounded by white wreaths and the portraits of the ill-fated couple. After the horrific tragedy, Alexa and Alex were taken in temporarily by their maternal relatives in Iowa. But seeing those innocent children who had lost both their father and mother, many people could not help wondering how could anyone ever explain such an enormous loss to them. Returning to the investigation, as soon as the scene was fully secured, the West Virginia State Police worked closely with the Summersville Police Department to seal off Joe's nails and spa. Forensic specialists quickly got to work collecting evidence. Each scattered shell casing was carefully numbered. The victims' positions were meticulously documented through photographs, and the shooting distances were precisely measured to reconstruct the scene. The semi-automatic handgun used by the attacker was also immediately seized for forensic examination. Subsequent verification confirmed that the weapon was legally owned by Patrick Cater. In addition, autopsy results showed that both Cuyen and Phi An died from multiple severe gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen, causing acute blood loss. Alongside the forensic work, another team of investigators took statements from witnesses. The 4 people who survived inside the salon, 2 employees and 2 customers, were brought to police headquarters. Still shaken, they stated that Patrick Cater had worked there for some time. That day, he had arrived early in the morning and went about things as usual. However, toward the end of the afternoon, Patrick suddenly left the salon. Everyone simply assumed he had asked to leave early or had personal business to handle. No one could have imagined that just over half an hour later, that employee would return with a weapon and aim straight at the owner couple to carry out a brutal attack. All witnesses confirmed that Patrick targeted only the owner couple directly, completely ignoring everyone else. One employee recalled that when Patrick walked into the salon with a weapon in his hand, Cuyen managed to blurt out, in utter disbelief, asking what he was doing before being attacked immediately afterward. This showed that even the victims had never anticipated Patrick's violent act in that fateful moment. Because the perpetrator was no longer alive, the investigation focused mainly on clarifying the motive and the circumstances that led to the tragedy. So who was Patrick Wayne Cater? And what was the true relationship between him and the victim couple? According to investigators, Patrick was an American citizen born in Illinois in 1970, but he had lived in Summersville, West Virginia for many years. He had a rather distinctive family background. His mother was Vietnamese while his father was a native-born American. Patrick was raised at the intersection of 2 cultures. Perhaps for that reason, he married a Vietnamese woman named Tina An, and they had 4 children together. The family lived right in Summersville and could be considered a typical multicultural household. One notable detail emerged when police dug deeper into Joe's Nails and Spa's business records. They discovered that Cuyen, Van Lay, and Patrick Cater were both listed on the lease agreement. This indicated that Patrick was not merely a wage-earning employee, but may have invested capital or held a co-management role at the nail salon alongside the victims. In addition, another source reported that Patrick's Vietnamese wife, who had professional expertise in nail work, was the one who initiated the opening of Joe's Nails and Spa at Merchant Walk, and later invited Cuyen and Phi An to partner with her. Patrick served as the manager, handling bookkeeping and overseeing the salon when needed. He did not work directly in the trade, but mainly took care of logistics and ensured security. If this information is accurate, then the relationship between the perpetrator and the victims did not stop at being co-workers. It also involved a business partnership with shared interests and obligations. From these facts, the leading hypothesis was that the case may have stemmed from intense internal conflicts within the business. With that assumption, investigators focused on digging deeper into the complicated business relationship between the parties. They thoroughly interviewed people who knew both sides and reviewed all financial documents and accounting records of the nail salon to look for clues of a breakdown. Another theory suggested that Patrick suspected the couple had outplayed him or were planning to push his family out of the partnership. It was also possible that Patrick was facing financial hardship, which fueled an ambition to take over the entire nail salon. Although the specific motive could not be confirmed with absolute certainty because the perpetrator was no longer alive, the complex partnership between him and the Lay couple made it clear that this case was not random at all. Beyond investigating motive, police also ran a background check on Patrick. The results showed he had no serious prior criminal record. People who knew Patrick described him as generally calm, quiet, and somewhat withdrawn in everyday life. That contrast made Patrick's frenzied violence even harder to comprehend. The handgun used in the attack had been legally purchased earlier and kept at Patrick's home. He was not on any police watch list, nor in any psychiatrist's records. In other words, this horrific tragedy was completely unexpected to those around him. So had Patrick suffered some extreme psychological rupture that no one knew about? Something that pushed him past the limit and drove him to such ruthless violence? In the days that followed, investigators held press briefings to provide the public with preliminary information. They confirmed the identities of the perpetrator and the victims and emphasized that the tragedy arose from an internal dispute rather than an attack targeting any community. This was meant to reassure Somersville residents that it was an isolated incident and that the threat to the public had been removed. Even so, for many people, the question of the deeper cause remained like a haunting obsession. Although police leaned toward a business dispute theory, what exactly enraged Patrick, which event was the final straw, or what he had been planning, those secrets were buried with him forever. To better visualize this crime, let's rewind the sequence of that terrifying evening based on what the investigation uncovered. On the afternoon of the 28th of July, 2022, Patrick Cater was still at Joe's Nails and Spa, working as usual. According to the leading scenario, it is very possible that near closing time, Patrick and Cuyen Lay had a tense exchange, most likely related to money or business interests. After that, Patrick left the salon in anger, marking the moment his rage began to spiral out of control. After leaving, Patrick went home to retrieve the 9mm semi-automatic handgun he had always kept there. Perhaps by then, the intent to take revenge had already taken clear shape in his mind. At around 6:30 p.m., Patrick returned to the Merchant Walk area, concealed the weapon on his person, and walked straight into Joe's Nails and Spa, a place that, just tens of minutes earlier, had still been his familiar workplace. The moment he stepped inside, without a single warning, Patrick drew the gun, aimed directly at Cuyen and Fionn, and pulled the trigger. The first bullet struck Cuyen, and he collapsed in disbelief. Seeing this, Fiann panicked and rushed to support her husband, only to be hit immediately by the next shots. In just a few short seconds, Patrick coldly fired multiple rounds in rapid succession, sending both of them to the floor. The decisiveness of the attack showed this was deliberate and carefully calculated, not a random outburst. Witnessing a scene of such horror, everyone else inside the salon froze, then immediately fled, screaming as they scrambled for cover. Minutes later, Somersville police arrived. When officers stormed in, Patrick was still standing beside the victims, weapon in hand. Despite repeated commands to drop the gun, he refused to comply. In that life or death moment, Patrick raised the gun, forcing police to shoot in self-defense. He was hit and fell right next to the two victims he had just attacked. The entire incident unfolded in under 15 minutes, from the moment Patrick returned to the salon to the moment he was stopped by police. Yet the consequences were beyond repair. 2 children lost both parents, 4 other children lost their father, and an entire peaceful town was plunged into tragedy. Because the perpetrator, Patrick Wayne Cater, did not survive after the attack, there would be no criminal trial in this case. Under normal circumstances, had he lived, he would certainly have been prosecuted on the most serious charges, such as first-degree murder and assault with a deadly weapon, and would have faced an extremely severe sentence. In this situation, however, because Patrick was killed during the police response, the criminal case file was effectively closed on the spot. Even without a courtroom process, law enforcement still conducted a strict internal investigation into the officer's use of force to ensure transparency and legality. The results later confirmed that the Somersville officers acted fully within protocol. They had to fire because Patrick was armed and posed a direct threat to others' safety. That decisive action was considered necessary to protect the community. As a result, no officers were disciplined. On the contrary, local residents expressed gratitude that law enforcement intervened in time, preventing the tragedy from spreading further. On the civil side, the victim's family had every right to file lawsuits to resolve property matters such as disputes over invested capital in the nail salon or to pursue life insurance compensation. However, information about any such litigation was not made public. Perhaps the family's top priority at that time was not winning or losing in court, but ensuring proper funeral arrangements for the deceased and caring for the two children who had just been orphaned. The tragedy at Joe's Nails and Spa may have ended legally, but its aftershocks and impact continued to linger in the community. Local and national media alike were shaken by the tragedy. It was a painful reminder that even a small, peaceful town deep in Appalachia could not escape the shadow of gun violence. Major outlets such as AP and Newsweek reported on the case, emphasizing the bloody and shocking nature of a Vietnamese couple being killed by a coworker at their workplace. The Vietnamese community in the United States also paid close attention. Many news pages shared the family's heartbreaking story as a painful reminder of the hidden risks that immigrant workers may face while living far from home. Local public opinion and social media users alike strongly condemned Patrick Wayne Cater's brutal actions. Even though he also died, the outrage over the crime still boiled. In people's minds, Patrick was seen as a ruthless betrayer, someone who abused his friends' trust and then took their lives out of greed or petty personal hatred. In Somersville, residents could not hide their shock and boundless grief for the victims. Right in front of Joe's Nails and Spa, just one day after the tragedy, people quietly placed fresh flowers, candles, and condolence cards. Regular customers, neighbors, and local residents spontaneously created a small but deeply moving memorial corner on the spot. At the same time, human kindness helped ease the pain of loss. A community fundraiser called Help Alexa and Alex was quickly established to support the victims' two young children. Within just a few weeks, hundreds of people contributed, raising more than $13,000. This money was used to set up an education fund for Alexa and Alex in the hope that they could continue pursuing a bright future just as their late parents had wished. And what do you think was the real motive behind Patrick Wayne Cater's actions in this case? Was it truly an internal business dispute, or was there another dark, undisclosed secret hidden beneath the surface? Don't hesitate to leave a comment and share your own theory or perspective. On Friday night, November 22nd, 2013, the three-member family of Lane Ma was busy wrapping up the day at Hong Kong Nails, located in Miami-Dade County, Florida. The woman was cleaning up and getting ready to close, while her husband, Hai Nam Vu, was playing with their 10-year-old son, Aaron Vu. But the warm family atmosphere was suddenly shattered by noise outside the door. Without warning, two armed men rushed into the salon. They pulled out firearms, threatened everyone, and shouted for money. The nail salon plunged into chaos. Customers and employees scattered to hide. Some screamed as the two robbers approached, and others tried to call 911. In that chaotic moment, cold, deafening gunshots rang out. Lane Ma watched in horror as her husband and son were shot and collapsed to the floor. The two robbers fled quickly, leaving behind a heartbreaking scene. Lane Ma rushed to hold Aaron's small, blood-soaked body, crying out his name in desperate anguish. Another family member who was present quickly helped administer first aid to the father and son and urged everyone to call an ambulance. Although Hai Nam Vu had been severely wounded in the shoulder, he still struggled toward his child. He kept calling Aaron's name, but the boy no longer responded. At 11 o'clock at night, an ambulance sped to the scene. Both Aaron and Hai Nam were rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The father appeared to fade from severe blood loss, while the 10-year-old boy fell into a deep coma. Then the terrible news arrived. Aaron Vu did not survive due to the severity of his injuries, while his father was taken into emergency surgery. Family and friends received calls in the middle of the night, shocked, devastated, and heartbroken beyond words. The heartbreaking case, witnessed firsthand by the boy's mother and people who knew the victim, was immediately reported to the North Miami police. Within minutes, the first investigators arrived and began a race against time to track down the perpetrators. The crime scene was haunting even for the most seasoned detectives. Inside the small nail salon, chairs and tables were knocked over, bottles of nail polish shattered across the floor, mixed with dark red bloodstains. Aaron Vu's body lay near the entrance, surrounded by scattered shell casings. His father, who had been severely injured, had already been taken away for emergency treatment, leaving behind a blood-soaked shirt and mud-stained combat boots. Terror was still etched on the faces of the witnesses. Some nail technicians and customers were still trembling, breaking into sobs as they described what happened. They said the two attackers stormed into the salon like predators, shoved firearms toward everyone, and shouted in street slang, demanding all the money. They decisively grabbed cash from the register drawer and rummaged through customers' wallets. With shaking voices, some witnesses told investigators that before fleeing, one robber suddenly turned back and fired without mercy toward the owner's family. 2 shots, one hit Aaron and the other lodged in Hai Nam's shoulder. That detail sent chills through the investigators. It seemed they fired simply to satisfy cruelty, because the victims had offered no resistance at all. At the scene, police recovered the salon's security video, revealing the first crucial lead. The entire brazen robbery had been clearly recorded. The footage showed 2 young men with their faces partially covered, rushing into the salon with firearms. They moved fast and acted coldly. Notably, while exiting, one robber pulled his face covering down, exposing his face clearly to the camera. Investigators immediately extracted still images from the video. It showed the face of an African-descended young man, roughly 18 to 20 years old. That night, police secured the scene, collected shell casings for ballistic analysis, and began searching for traces around the salon. A witness outside reported seeing the 2 suspects jump into a black pickup truck and speed away. This matched the appearance of a black Dodge Ram captured by the salon's security camera. The first pieces of the puzzle were now in place, allowing investigators to form an initial picture of the crime. This was a targeted armed robbery. The perpetrators came with weapons and were willing to pull the trigger without provocation. Their target was cash from the salon and from customers getting their nails done. But the estimated amount stolen was only about $300, an unbearably small sum compared to the life of a child. Aaron Vu was born in 2003 and was in 5th grade. He was the first child of Hai Nam Vu and Lain Ma. Aaron was lively, affectionate, and well-behaved. Friends and relatives described him as funny and kind, always trying to make the people around him laugh. He loved soccer, enjoyed video games, and often helped his parents with small tasks at the nail salon after school. Aaron's mother, Lain Ma, loved her son so much that she had reduced her working hours the year before to spend more time caring for Aaron and his younger sibling. The Vu family lived in Miramar, a city near Miami, but every day the parents drove more than 20 kilometers to the North Miami-Dade area to run Hong Kong nails. The salon was well known locally and supported by many regular customers, an achievement built through years of hard work by the Vietnamese immigrant couple. Hai Nam Vu, Aaron's father, had served in the United States Marine Corps, then left the military and moved into business. Neighbors respected him for his discipline, responsibility, and willingness to help others. In the eyes of the local Vietnamese community, the Vu family was a model of perseverance. They worked hard, raised a good child, and stayed closely connected to their church and school community. Aaron grew up surrounded by his parents' love. He was always polite and did well in school. That is why his death not only left an unhealable wound for his family, but also cast a deep silence over the entire local Vietnamese community. Determined to bring justice for Aaron, investigators from the Miami-Dade Police Department issued an alert across the entire unit that very night and launched a manhunt for the perpetrators. Early assessments focused on the hypothesis that this was a planned robbery. The lieutenant in charge of the crime scene investigation believed the primary objective was cash, while the armed assault was meant as intimidation. Even so, authorities did not rule out the possibility that this crew had committed crimes elsewhere and was willing to shoot in order to conceal their identities. With that analysis, evidence collection was carried out urgently to prevent more similar killing. Investigators combed through every millimeter of the scene and recovered several .40 caliber shell casings, along with bullet impacts on the wall. Preliminary analysis suggested the gunman used a compact semi-automatic handgun, most likely a common Glock or Sig Sauer model. Crime scene technicians also found several unfamiliar fingerprints on the cash register counter and certain objects, but this lead seemed unlikely to pay off because the salon was a public place and prints could have belonged to many customers and employees. The most critical clue was the image of one suspect captured by the salon's camera. That image was printed and distributed to all patrol units. Suspect number 1 was described as a young man of color with an average build, wearing a black t-shirt and a round knit cap. He held the gun in his right hand, and his decisive movements suggested prior criminal experience. Meanwhile, suspect number 2 was a young man with his face covered by a red bandana, with a similar build to his accomplice. Both appeared very young and extremely reckless. To quickly identify the two men, mobilizing tips from the community became the key. The victim's family and police jointly held a press conference on Monday afternoon, November 25th. Appearing before the media with his arms still bandaged, his face gaunt, and seated in a wheelchair after leaving intensive care at Ryder Trauma Center, Hai Nam Vu fought back grief as he pleaded for the public's help in finding the person who had killed his son. His anguished words moved many people across Florida. That same day, Miami-Dade police announced the reward for information would be increased to $25,000. Officers went door to door in nearby neighborhoods, distributing thousands of flyers with the suspect's photos and asking for leads. On local news broadcasts, the image of Aaron smiling beside his family appeared next to the cold face of the suspect, fueling a wave of outrage and a shared determination that Miami had to catch the killers as soon as possible. The appeal quickly produced results. Within just a few days, the Miami-Dade Crime Stoppers hotline received around 100 tips from the public. Most were reports of people who had seen someone resembling the suspect or had heard someone bragging about being involved. Amid that flood of information, one anonymous call on the night of November 26th became a turning point. On the other end was the voice of a young man whispering that he recognized the person in the photo. He said the suspect's name was Anthon, and he even knew that Anthon was staying at his sister's house. Using that information, police quickly cross-checked their records and narrowed in on a matching individual, Anthon Reagan Jr., born on November 26, 1994, turning 19 years old on that very day. This was not an unfamiliar name to law enforcement. According to records, Anthon was born and raised in a family steeped in criminal history, with both his father and his uncle serving prison sentences for homicide. As a result, he had already become a troubled figure at an early age. He was first arrested at 13 for assaulting a school employee. After that, Reagan's record only grew thicker, including theft, illegal weapons, possession, and petty robberies. At 17, he and accomplices carried out an armed robbery and were arrested. But because he was not yet legally treated as an adult, he was placed in Miami-Dade County's Juvenile Detention Rehabilitation Program for several months. After completing that program in 2013, Reagan did not reform. He did not pursue school or hold any steady job. Instead, he lingered with older street gang members, looking for fast money through crime, while still under local juvenile supervision. An arrest warrant for Reagan was issued immediately. On the night of November 26, 2013, a police tactical unit raided a house on NW 53rd Street in Miami, the home of Anthon's sister. As the tip had indicated, under cover of darkness, officers surrounded the house and used a loudspeaker to order those inside to surrender. At first, there was no response, but after several tense minutes, a woman identified as Anthon's sister opened the door and stepped out, visibly frightened. Stammering, she said her brother was in a bedroom and had a weapon. After confirming there was no one else inside, the tactical team moved in. In the bedroom, Anthon Reagan Jr. was hiding under a blanket, curled into a corner of the bed. When officers pulled him out, he struggled violently and resisted fiercely, causing one officer to suffer a minor injury. Police had to force him to the ground and secure his hands before they could fully control the situation. During a search, officers recovered a .40 caliber Glock 23 handgun and several suspicious items such as cash and jewelry. Anthon Reagan Jr. was formally taken into custody, ending 4 days on the run. He was transported to the Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center that same night on his 19th birthday. A bitterly ironic image, a young man newly of age already facing the full weight of the law. Meanwhile, evidence collection and analysis intensified after the arrest to strengthen the case file. At his sister's home, police recovered a red bandana believed to have been used by suspect number 2 to cover his face, along with clothing that matched what was seen in the video. Reagan's Glock 23 was sent for ballistic testing against the shell casings recovered at the crime scene. The results confirmed a match, indicating that this weapon fired the bullet that killed Aaron Vu. In addition, GPS data from Anthon Ragon's mobile phone showed that on the night of November 22, 2013, his phone was in the area of Hong Kong Nails, matching the time of the crime. With this solid evidence, Miami-Dade police charged Anthon Reagan with first-degree murder, attempted murder, armed robbery, and battery on a law enforcement officer. However, the case did not end there. The investigation continued, focused on hunting down the second accomplice. Throughout Reagan's interrogation, he stubbornly remained silent and refused to provide any information about his accomplice. He only insisted that he didn't shoot anyone and demanded a lawyer. Leads on the remaining suspect shifted to other channels. Based on witness statements and intelligence, police suspected the second man might be a friend or relative of Reagan, someone who had spent time running the streets with him. One name that surfaced was Terry Allen Neely, 24 years old, a person known to be close to Reagan within the group of younger street associates. Neely had a record for petty theft and was believed to have been frequently seen with Reagan in recent months. However, because investigators still lacked direct evidence to charge him, they could only keep Neely under discreet surveillance. But the case took an unexpected turn, stemming from the suspect already in custody. In early 2014, Anthon Reagan faced additional charges tied to a string of other crimes. First, based on objective evidence collected, police discovered that Reagan's firearm was also linked to the killing of Luis Miguel Perez, 21 years old, on November 1st, 2013, at Motel 7 in North Miami. That case had previously remained unsolved. The victim was believed to be a low-level drug dealer who was shot on a motel staircase. Security footage from Motel 7 also captured an attacker who strongly resembled Reagan. And it didn't stop there. Reagan was also suspected of shooting and injuring a cyclist named Kevin Burke on November 7, 2013. Burke survived and later identified Reagan. In addition, Reagan was tied to a brazen robbery at a Royal Castle fast food restaurant on November 9, 2013, where a female employee said he pressed a gun to her head and stole money. He was even believed to have robbed a laundromat and a dollar store near the nail salon during that same November. All of these crimes occurred within the first 3 weeks of November 2013, forming a shocking crime spree. The media called it Anthon Reagan's Mad November. And it was from these very cases that police gained enough grounds to arrest Terry Allen Neely. At that time, it had not yet been proven that Neely was the masked man in the Aaron Vu case, but he was still put in handcuffs after being identified as an accomplice in the Motel 7 incident. From the leads and statements they gathered, police successfully reconstructed the full sequence of this November crime spree. On the night of November 1st, 2013, Anthon Reagan drove around North Miami with Terry Neely looking for opportunities. Both carried weapons, intending to rob small-time dealers of goods or cash. At Motel 7, they spotted Luis Miguel Perez sitting on the stairs. Suspecting he was carrying product, Reagan and Neely approached, pretending to ask to buy. Suddenly, Reagan pulled his gun and shot Perez in the chest, while Neely searched him and took a package and the victim's wallet. The two fled immediately afterward. On November 7th, 2013, Reagan drove around the streets late at night. He happened to see Kevin Burke riding his bicycle home. Perhaps simply because Burke caught his eye, Reagan then aimed and fired, dropping Burke to the ground before speeding away. Burke was critically injured and remained in a coma for nearly a month, but he survived. Burke later stated that he had never known Reagan and had no prior conflict with him. He had become a target purely at random, chosen by Reagan's hunger for violence. On November 9th, 2013, it was another night of hustling for Reagan and his accomplice. He stormed into the Royal Castle Burger restaurant in North Miami, pressed a gun to the cashier's head, and shouted for her to open the register. Terrified, the employee complied and handed over a few $100s. Before leaving, Reagan warned everyone to lie down on the floor, then fled. No one was shot in this robbery, but the restaurant's security camera captured images of the robber that closely resembled Reagan. In mid-November 2013, Reagan and Terry continued committing a series of petty robberies to get spending money and buy drugs. They robbed a laundromat near Liberty City, taking cash and belongings, and days later hit a dollar store near Hong Kong Nails, stealing a small amount of cash and merchandise. These incidents received little attention at the time because the losses were minor and no one was seriously injured. But taken together, they showed that Reagan was becoming increasingly reckless, almost intoxicated by how easy it had been to take money throughout November. By November 22nd, 2013, this thug reached the peak of his crime spree. That night, Reagan suggested to Neely that they pull a big one, believing service businesses would have more cash at the end of the day. They brought 2 firearms and chose Hong Kong nails as their target. At 7:45 in the evening, Reagan drove a black Dodge pickup with Neely inside and parked on a corner a few houses away, the engine still running. Both got out, Reagan holding a gun, Neely grabbing a red cloth to wrap over his face. Then they suddenly rushed straight into the salon. Just as the camera later captured, they shouted threats and ordered everyone to raise their hands and get down on the floor. Reagan aimed his gun at the cashier counter and demanded money, while Neely snatched wallets and phones from several customers and nail technicians. In just over a minute, they collected about $300 and a few small items. As the two turned and ran toward the exit, Aaron Vu, who was lying on the floor holding his mother, slightly lifted his head in fear and looked after them. In that instant, it may have caught Reagan's eye. The robber suddenly stopped at the doorway and swung his gun back toward Lane Ma's family. Without warning, he fired 2 shots in rapid succession. The first bullet struck young Aaron in the chest from a distance of just over 3 meters. The second grazed Hai Nam Vu's shoulder, dropping him to the floor. After that brutal display, Reagan ran outside, and he and Neely escaped in the Dodge. Everything happened so fast that some witnesses outside only saw the suspect's vehicle speeding away and could not remember the license plate. Left behind was a heartbreaking scene. Aaron Vu collapsed on the salon floor beside his badly wounded father, while innocent people stood in utter shock. Once prosecutors were able to connect the cases, the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office decided to split them into 2 main case files, one for the killing of Luis Perez and one for the killing of Aaron Vu, along with related charges. The prosecution's strategy appeared aimed at ensuring Reagan faced the maximum penalty in both cases, especially considering the possibility of the death penalty for the killing of a child. Meanwhile, after Terry Neely was arrested in 2014, he grew fearful of potentially facing the death penalty, like Reagan. By 2020, he agreed to plead guilty and cooperate in exchange for a lesser sentence, around 20 years in prison. In return, Neely promised to testify against Reagan. This was a critical move by prosecutors to seal a death sentence for Reagan in the Aaron Vu case. Nearly 12 years after that fateful night in 2025, the case against Anthon Reagan was finally brought to trial. The legal process had stretched on in part because Reagan had to appear in court repeatedly for multiple charges stemming from his 2013 crime spree. The first trial, regarding the killing of Luis Perez, took place in early 2025 at the Miami-Dade County Criminal Court. Although this case was not directly connected to Aaron, what happened in that courtroom had a major impact on how the Aaron case would be handled later. Anthon Reagan faced a first-degree murder charge, and the state of Florida sought the death penalty. The evidence against Reagan in the Perez case was highly persuasive, from security footage to statements contained in Neely's plea agreement. Even though, in court, Terry Neely unexpectedly backtracked and claimed he had never agreed to testify against Reagan, the overall evidence was already overwhelming. After only a few days of arguments, the jury quickly found Reagan guilty of first-degree murder. The case then moved into the penalty phase. At that stage, Hai Nam Vu was also called to the stand as an impact witness to demonstrate just how dangerous and inhumane Reagan was. Facing the man who had taken his son's life in court, Vu trembled slightly, yet his eyes remained firm as he looked straight at Reagan and unequivocally confirmed the defendant's brutality. The jury then deliberated for just 2 hours before recommending life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, rather than the death penalty, for Reagan in the Perez case. That recommendation was based on the jury's consideration of Reagan's young age and certain mitigating factors. On May 8, 2025, the court sentenced Anthon Reagan to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder. In addition, during 2025, Reagan also received sentences for other crimes in the November spree: 60 years for the Royal Castle robbery, 37 years for shooting Kevin Burke, and several other lesser sentences. As for the killing of Aaron Vu, the trial is currently expected to take place in 2026. At present, pretrial proceedings are still being prepared due to the case's complexity and the prosecution's intent to secure the highest possible outcome for Reagan, removing him from society permanently. On the defense side, attorneys may continue to present mitigating arguments, such as a troubled childhood, mental illness, or the claim that it is unfair for Neely to receive roughly 20 years while Reagan faces the death penalty. However, because Neely has already pleaded guilty, Reagan cannot credibly deny his leading role in the shooting. Even so, to this day, he continues to deny the charges and remains determined to fight the case to the end. That afternoon, T&T Nails had a few regular customers stopping by for beauty services after work. Everyone was busy when suddenly the salon door flew open, startling everyone inside. A panicked man rushed in and ran straight toward the back of the salon. Close behind him, a stranger chased after him, gripping a handgun. Before anyone could understand what was happening, a series of deafening shots rang out one after another. Quang Tran stood stunned for a few seconds. At first, he thought it was just a prank, like fireworks or something, but the sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder quickly pulled him into a terrifying reality. In that moment of shock, Quang heard the piercing scream of his fiancée, Truk, and sensed something was terribly wrong. He frantically searched for her and saw that Truk had collapsed, blood pouring from her head and soaking her shoulder. By then, the gunfire had stopped. Quang screamed out her name in despair. His heartbreak instantly turned into reckless courage. He charged straight at the gunman. With no weapon in his hands, he used every ounce of strength to fight back against the killer. Fortunately, after a hard strike, the attacker went down. While Quang pinned the suspect to the floor, others in the salon, including Truk's brother-in-law, Thon Howen, and several customers, snapped out of their shock and rushed in to help. They wrestled the gun away from him and held the frenzied attacker down while trying to call 911. A few minutes later, the Baltimore Police Department's rapid response officers arrived at the scene. By then, Truk lay motionless on the floor at the back of the salon, her head still bleeding, her hands smeared with nail polish. A white plastic foot-soaked basin had tipped over, water spilling everywhere and mixing with blood, forming a dark red stream across the glossy tile floor. Around them, several chairs had been knocked over. Nail polish bottles and paper towels were scattered everywhere. The sharp, familiar smell of nail chemicals now mixed with the burnt stench of gunpowder and the heavy metallic scent of blood, creating an indescribably eerie atmosphere. In one corner, several civilians were gathered, restraining a young, muscular man. His clothes were disheveled, and there were a few scrapes on his face and hands. There was no doubt about it, he was the one who caused this tragedy. The on-scene commander immediately signaled officers to handcuff the suspect and escort him to a patrol car, while an ambulance quickly rushed the victims to emergency care. Truk was transported to the nearby Johns Hopkins Hospital, but the gunshot wound that penetrated her head was too severe, and she did not survive. The man who had been chased, later identified as Derek Wallace, 26 years old, was shot multiple times in the back and abdomen, but he was fortunate to survive surgery and remained under intensive care at the hospital. Other officers urgently secured the scene. They found 5 spent shell casings scattered from the entrance stretching deeper into the salon, evidence that the shooter had been running while firing, exactly as witnesses described. Each casing was carefully numbered for later forensic examination. A soot-ringed bullet hole in the plywood wall partition at the back of the salon showed that at least one round had missed its intended target. On a table, investigators also saw a .38 caliber handgun that a bystander had picked up and set down, its magazine completely empty. This was likely the weapon the attacker used during the shooting. Law enforcement's initial impression was very clear. This was not a robbery or a profit-driven killing. It showed signs of a personal vendetta because the attacker had relentlessly chased one man down. In the process, the female victim was tragically struck by a stray bullet. In peacetime, right inside a modest nail salon, gun violence took the life of an innocent woman. Everyone kept asking the same question: what led to this cruel tragedy? According to her family, Truc Thi Le Nguyen, 42 years old, was a petite Vietnamese woman, hardworking, resilient, and full of determination. Born and raised in Vietnam, Truc entered an informal marriage with Quang Tran. then immigrated to the United States with him just a few years before the incident occurred. She had only recently settled in America, hoping to build a better life for her family. In Baltimore, Troop quickly integrated into the Vietnamese community and found work as a nail technician at T&T Nails, owned by her brother-in-law. Nail work requires precision and patience, qualities that suited Troop perfectly. Local customers also grew fond of this Asian woman because she was always warm and welcoming, exceptionally skilled, and genuinely sincere in conversation. In the eyes of her loved ones, Troop was a capable and devoted woman. Even while working hard to make a living, she still made time to care for her young son and keep the family together. She was learning to drive so that she could later find a better job and provide for her child's future. Although the immigration journey was still unfamiliar in many ways, Troop remained optimistic. She believed in the American dream, that as long as she worked diligently and persevered, her family would gradually build a more prosperous and safer life in this land of opportunity. But cruel fate brought violence to Troop's workplace on May 5, 2014, taking the life of a kind-hearted woman in the very moment she was doing the work she loved. Troop's death left an irreplaceable void for her family. Quang Trun lost the woman he loved, their young son lost his mother, and the family lost a devoted daughter far from home. The Vietnamese community in Baltimore was also stunned and heartbroken by the terrible news that a gentle nail technician had been killed senselessly right at her workplace. Notably, the case took place in Baltimore, Maryland, where, in 2014, violent crime was a serious crisis, with 211 homicides in just that single year. East Baltimore, especially around Monument Street, was a densely populated working-class community, home to both hard-working immigrant families trying to get by and street gangs settling scores with one another. At that time, the city was striving to reduce crime, yet daytime shootings were still not uncommon, especially in hotspots like East Baltimore. Residents had grown used to hearing police sirens in the distance and even stayed on guard against the risk of stray bullets whenever conflicts erupted. The Vietnamese community in Baltimore was not very large, but it was close-knit, often concentrated in small service businesses such as restaurants, Asian markets, and especially nail salons. Truth Thi Linh Nguyen and her family were no exception. They operated T&T Nails at 2333 East Monument Street, earning an honest living through nail work, a profession widely seen in Vietnamese communities across the United States. Truc had once shared that she truly loved doing nails in Baltimore because customers there were friendly and respected workers despite differences in background. Yet it was precisely in that familiar space that merciless destiny came crashing down on her. Back to the case. The suspect was immediately taken to the police station for questioning. There, his identity was quickly confirmed. His name was Tremaine Washington, 26 years old, a Baltimore resident. Preliminary records showed that Washington had a troubled past. He grew up in a high-crime neighborhood and had ties to street gangs. In the interrogation room, Washington initially stubbornly denied everything, but faced with undeniable evidence and the fact that he had been caught in the act, he eventually bowed his head and confessed. Washington stated that his target was not Truc Nguyen, but Derek Wallace, the man who had been at the nail salon that afternoon. He admitted he ran into the salon only to take care of Wallace over a personal grudge, and that Truc was merely struck by a stray bullet during that pursuit. This confession matched investigators' initial assessment. Police also looked deeper into the relationship between Washington and Wallace and found that the two men had known each other before and that there was likely a conflict tied to street grudges or territory disputes. Authorities did not release specific details, but a later statement from Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby implied that the shooting stemmed from two men using gun violence to settle a personal score. Wallace himself, Washington's primary target later, after recovering, also acknowledged to police that he and Washington had previously had a serious falling out, leaving Washington bent on revenge. And when the two crossed paths that afternoon, Washington acted immediately. He chased Wallace with a gun in his hand. With nowhere else to go, Wallace had no choice but to run into a nearby business to take shelter, hoping Washington wouldn't dare keep going. That place was T&T Nails, owned by Than Huyen, Truc's brother-in-law. But overcome with rage, Washington pursued him anyway. Seeing his target running toward the back of the room, Washington raised the gun and pulled the trigger without hesitation. The deafening gunshot jolted everyone. The first bullet tore through the air past the cashier counter and slammed into a product shelf at the back of the salon. Wallace kept running, trying to hide behind a partition. Washington charged forward a few steps and kept squeezing the trigger. The second shot cracked through the air. Its bullet drove straight into Wallace's back, causing him to buckle, then crawl in agony toward the pedicure chairs where Truk was working. The third and fourth shots followed, shattering the salon's usual calm. One bullet hit Wallace in the abdomen, and he collapsed completely. Customers screamed in terror. Some ducked under tables, while others rushed for the door to escape. In that moment of chaos, Truk Nguyen was crouched beside a water basin. Tragically, the fifth shot flew straight toward Truk. In a split second of fate, she only had time to widen her eyes. No words came out. Her body collapsed, blood pouring relentlessly from a fatal wound. Everything happened so fast that her husband, Quang Trun, standing at the counter just a few meters away, didn't even fully grasp what was happening. He was truly stunned only when he saw his wife fall, blood running down her face. As for Washington, after firing the shots, he moved closer to Wallace to check whether he had finished the job. In his frenzy, he likely didn't even notice that he had hit an innocent nail technician nearby. Seeing Washington close in on his target, Quang Trun charged forward. Watching his wife get shot, Quang seemed to lose all control. He threw all his strength into a punch to Washington's head. The sudden blow made the attacker stagger and crash face first onto the floor, the gun flying out of his hand. Washington struggled, but Quang pinned him down using both hands to lock him in place. The man fought violently, kicking and swinging wildly, sending nearby chairs and tables clattering as they knocked into each other. In the middle of it all, Than Huynh Truk's brother-in-law rushed from the front of the salon to help restrain the attacker. A few braver customers also stepped in, and together they forced the killer down onto the floor. Washington was completely overwhelmed by the outrage and collective strength of the men protecting their loved ones. He screamed curses, but his arms were twisted behind his back. Blood seeped from the scrapes on his face, but no one showed even a hint of sympathy. About 5 minutes later, the shrill wail of police sirens stopped right outside the salon. Officers stormed in and quickly took over from the civilians, restraining the suspect. Washington was handcuffed and led away in an instant, still muttering something under his breath. In addition to witness statements, investigators also obtained security camera footage from near the nail salon. According to one officer, 2 corner security cameras captured part of the incident, including Washington running along the sidewalk with a gun and rushing into T&T Nails, chasing behind a man believed to be Wallace. The video was grainy, but it was enough to confirm Washington's presence at the scene and the time frame of his attack. With witness testimony, physical evidence from the scene, and surveillance video combined, authorities had more than enough solid grounds to charge Tremaine Washington in the death of Truk Thi Le Nguyen, as well as the shooting that seriously wounded Derek Wallace. Just 24 hours after the crime, Baltimore police announced the case had been clarified and that Washington had been placed in criminal detention. The local community could breathe a partial sigh of relief that a dangerous offender had been arrested immediately. But the pain of the loss would take far longer to fade, especially for the victim's family. After the investigation was completed, the case file involving Truk Thi Le Nguyen was forwarded to the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office for prosecution. Tremaine Washington was charged with a series of serious offenses, led by first-degree murder in the death of Truk Nguyen, first-degree attempted murder of Derek Wallace, along with related charges such as assault with a deadly weapon and firearms violations. These charges could have exposed him to a life sentence if convicted in court. During the legal proceedings, to avoid a prolonged trial and reduce risk, Washington's defense attorney negotiated a plea deal with prosecutors. As a result, Washington agreed to plead guilty to 2 charges, first-degree murder and first-degree attempted murder. In return, the prosecution dropped some of the other and recommended a capped sentence rather than life without parole. The plea agreement also spared the victim's family from having to endure a lengthy trial that could reopen their grief. On November 20th, 2015, at the Baltimore County Circuit Court, Tremaine Washington bowed his head and pleaded guilty in the presence of the victim's family. The judge then sentenced him to 40 years in prison. The sentence included 20 years for first-degree murder and 20 years for first-degree attempted murder, to be served consecutively, totaling 40 years without eligibility for early parole. This also meant Washington would spend at least 4 decades behind bars, a steep price for what he had done. At the sentencing hearing, a representative of the prosecution expressed deep sorrow over Truk's senseless death. It was a meaningless act against a woman who had just come to America to seek a better life. She was learning to drive so she could get a better job, Prosecutor Kurt Bjorklund said, emphasizing the enormous loss suffered by the victim's family. Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney, also strongly condemned the defendant's disregard for the law, stressing that using gun violence to pursue personal revenge only leads to tragedy, and expressing hope that the victim's family would one day find peace after their loss. On Washington's side, no family members spoke in court. Before the judge, Washington remained sullen, offering only a belated apology and admitting, "I wish I hadn't done it." That faint apology could not ease the pain of Truk's loved ones. Quang Trun held his wife's memorial portrait and silently cried throughout the hearing. The victim's family said that the 40-year sentence for Washington was acceptable, even though it could never bring Truk back. They expressed hope that Washington would live with regret for the rest of his life, and that this case would serve as a warning to anyone reckless enough to disregard the lives of innocent people. The heartbreaking death of Truc Thi Le Nguyen sent shockwaves through the local Baltimore community, as well as Vietnamese communities across the United States. Local newspapers widely reported the story of a nail salon employee killed senselessly by a stray bullet, emphasizing the victim's innocence. Public outrage erupted over the reckless, lawless actions of Tremaine Washington, a man willing to open fire in broad daylight to settle a personal score, regardless of the danger to the community. The case once again sounded the alarm about gun violence ravaging Baltimore. A personal conflict can escalate into a tragedy that takes an innocent life. For the victim's family, after the trial, Quang Trun and his son held a funeral to say goodbye to Truk. With donations from the community, including Baltimore residents and Vietnamese Americans, Truk's body was returned to Vietnam for burial, so her relatives back home could see her one last time. Before that, a warm memorial service took place right in Baltimore. On May 12, 2014, dozens of people gathered in front of T&T Nails, each holding a white candle. They arranged the candles in a half circle around the words "Love You Forever" truck placed at the salon's entrance. In the soft candlelight and through choked back tears, people stood up one by one to share memories of Truk, of a gentle, hard-working woman who always gave her all for her family and community. The memorial fell silent when her husband, Quang, thanked everyone and promised he would raise their son to grow up well and live a good life. So he would never let down the child's mother, now gone. Today, more than 10 years have passed since the case of Truc Thi Le Nguyen was closed. The perpetrator remains behind bars and will stay there for decades to come. Yet the echo of the tragedy still lingers. Whenever people mention this case, Baltimore residents can't help but feel a bitter sadness for a Vietnamese immigrant family pursuing the American dream, only to be met with a nightmare of violence. The incident also forced many Vietnamese-owned nail salons to think seriously about workplace safety, especially in high-crime urban areas. Many salons installed reinforced glass doors and security cameras, and some employees even began carrying pepper spray for self-defense in worst-case scenarios. On a broader level, Truk's senseless death fueled debate over gun control and public safety in Baltimore. The city had seen many similar cases of bystanders killed by stray bullets, and Truc Nguyen's case became a painful example of that reality. The lesson from this tragedy is not only a warning to anyone reckless enough to disregard the law, but also a reminder for everyone to be cautious and prioritize personal safety. For Asian immigrant communities, this case is a reminder that they must work hard to move forward while also staying connected and supporting one another in a foreign environment filled with hidden risks. The T&T Nails case ended with justice served and the perpetrator held accountable, but the pain of Truk's family is something no trial and no sentence can truly heal. All we can do is hope that society learns from this tragedy to prevent such senseless killings from happening again, so that no innocent person like Truc Nguyen will ever have to lose their life in such a devastating way. On Saturday evening, July 14th, 2012, Nail and Hair Care Spa in Ellicott City, Maryland, began to quiet down as closing time approached. Most employees were putting away tools in the back room, while the front lobby had only a few last customers left. But suddenly, deafening gunshots rang out, sending everyone into shock and panic. In that moment of chaos, Agonized screams began coming from the entrance. Sensing something was terribly wrong, everyone rushed to the front. A horrifying scene hit them at once. A female employee was lying collapsed on the tiled floor, her uniform soaked through with blood. Not far away, another man was also writhing in pain. The victim's faint groans mixed with the terrified screams of witnesses, creating a scene of pure mayhem. People struggled to stay calm as they rushed to administer first aid and immediately called 911. Just minutes later, the wail of police and ambulance sirens cut through the air as they arrived. Under the constantly flashing emergency lights, the two victims were quickly loaded into ambulances. Both were in extremely critical condition, with injuries that posed an immediate threat to their lives. They were transported straight to the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center in Baltimore, a facility specializing in severe traumatic injuries. The crime scene was swiftly sealed off with yellow tape, drawing a mix of fear and curiosity from nearby residents. Inside what was normally a cozy spa, the scene had turned into chaos. Chairs and tables had been knocked over, nail polish bottles were scattered across the floor, and pools of blood were smeared in disturbing streaks. Near the entrance, investigators recovered multiple shell casings scattered across the floor, evidence that at least 5 shots had been fired. On the tile, a long trail of blood stretched from the doorway deeper into the salon, like the trace of a chase and a struggle that had just unfolded. Shattered glass from the door and furniture knocked out of place also suggested the attack happened in a flash and with extreme violence. As they processed the scene, investigators found no signs of a robbery or theft motive. Cash and valuables were untouched, and employees' handbags were still sitting at the counter, undisturbed. Through staff members, police quickly confirmed the female victim was Lan Phan, 34 years old, from Silver Spring. The injured man was Phung Tan Do, an acquaintance of Lan's. Notably, when they checked the database, they discovered that Lan had previously filed for a protective order against a man, and that the order was still active. That man was her ex-boyfriend, Tuan Minh Pham, 35 years old, from Beltsville, Maryland. This chilling coincidence forced investigators to consider a grim possibility. Was the shooter the very person Lan had once turned to the law to stop? In addition, witnesses at the scene provided a crucial detail. Immediately after the gunfire, they briefly saw an unfamiliar man rush out of the salon, jump into a tangent yellow car, and speed away. Although no one managed to identify his face in time, one quick-thinking customer managed to record the license plate as 2AK0291. As expected, a rapid search showed that a 1998 Honda Accord with that plate was registered to Tuan Minh Pham, the case's primary suspect. Within just a few hours, Howard County Police issued a nationwide warrant for Tuan Minh Pham on charges of attempted murder and related offenses. By the following evening, his vehicle was found abandoned on a quiet street in the nearby Columbia area. The fact that the car had been ditched mid-street indicated the suspect had planned his escape in advance, possibly switching to another vehicle or receiving help from someone else. Now, capturing him became law enforcement's top priority. Meanwhile, police continued digging into the victims' backgrounds in search of additional leads. The female victim's full name was Lan Hoang Mai Phan, 34 years old, a Vietnamese woman living in Silver Spring, Maryland. Every day, she drove more than half an hour to Ellicott City to work at Nail and Hair Care Spa. It was a place she had stayed with for years to make a living and support her small family. To friends and coworkers, Lan was gentle, hardworking, and always wore a smile while serving customers. But behind that smile was a life filled with storms. She had been in a relationship for nearly a decade with Tuan Minh Pham, the man now suspected of carrying out the shooting. Together, they had 2 daughters. Lan once believed Tuan Pham would be a strong support for the 3 of them, but her happiness slowly turned into a nightmare because of his explosive temper and abusive behavior. Throughout their years together, Tuan would often disappear for weeks at a time, leaving Lan and the children behind without a single explanation. The breaking point came when Lan discovered that Tuan had secretly returned to Vietnam, married in secret, and had even gotten another woman pregnant while still living with her. That blatant betrayal became the final straw, making Lan realize she could not endure it any longer. She began to fear for her own safety and her children's, forced to live beside a two-faced man with violent tendencies and an unstable state of mind. In the end, Lan Phan made a brave decision. She gathered her courage to leave Tuan and take her 2 daughters somewhere safe. In June 2012, she petitioned the court for an emergency protective order, barring him from approaching her or her children, and, under the law, stripping Tuan of the right to possess weapons. The order was approved immediately, showing that authorities also viewed him as a real threat. After legal intervention, Lan began trying to build a new, more peaceful life. She focused on her work at the nail salon, devoted herself to caring for her 2 young daughters, and received support from friends and coworkers. During that time, those close to her noticed that Lan was starting to open up again. After years of enduring violence, she longed for a steady source of emotional support. Fortunately, through friends' introductions, Lan met a kind man. He understood what she had been through and was always willing to encourage her. Even though they were still in the early stages of getting to know each other, his sincere care helped Lan slowly find her smile again. As for Phuong Thanh Do, the 40-year-old man who appeared at the salon that day, he was the older brother of this new boyfriend. Because his younger brother was busy, Phuong kindly agreed to pick Lan up after work, both to make sure she got home safely and to take the opportunity to visit his brother in Maryland, since he normally lived all the way in Florida. But no one could have imagined that this chance trip would unknowingly put him in Tuan Pham's sights, setting the stage for the horrific tragedy that followed. As soon as the victims were rushed to the hospital, Howard County Police threw their full resources into the investigation to capture the gunman. A warrant was immediately issued for Tuan Minh Pham. His identifying description, a stocky Asian man who might be covered in blood and armed, was broadcast to all checkpoints. Major routes and entry points were closely monitored to prevent him from fleeing Maryland or attempting to cross state lines. In addition, the FBI and police in neighboring states were asked to assist, because Pham could have hidden with acquaintances elsewhere. That same night, investigators raided Tuan Pham's home in Beltsville, but he was already gone. Inside, they found multiple signs that the suspect had carefully prepared for an escape. The house was unusually bare, and several important personal items were missing. As for the Honda Accord, as mentioned earlier, it was found abandoned on Allen Lane in the city of Columbia the following night. Fingerprint and DNA testing inside the vehicle confirmed that Tuan had been the driver. Back at the crime scene, police secured footage from the shopping center's security camera system. After extracting the video, the recording clearly showed a man matching Pham's appearance charging into the salon with a gun, then fleeing just seconds later. The camera also captured his Honda speeding out of the parking lot. This strong evidence gave authorities sufficient grounds to charge Tuan Minh Pham even without having him in custody. The manhunt for Tuan Minh Pham immediately spread across the media. Howard County Police released his photo along with an arrest warrant for 2 counts of first-degree attempted murder, as well as multiple related allegations involving assault and the use of a dangerous weapon. A reward of $2,500 was also offered for any tip leading to the suspect's arrest. At the time, the public was deeply unsettled by the thought that a brazen shooter was still at large, who might become his next victim. Because of that, the victims' families were placed under strict, discreet police protection in case Tuan Pham returned for retaliation. At the trauma center where Lan and Phuong were being treated, security personnel were stationed 24/7 outside their hospital rooms. But day after day, and week after week, Tuan Minh Pham remained missing. He seemed to have vanished completely from Maryland. Leads gradually hit a dead end. There were no financial transactions, no phone calls, and none of his friends or relatives admitted knowing where he was. During that time, the victim's conditions began to improve. Lan Phan underwent complex surgeries to remove a bullet from her shoulder and treat a wound that had penetrated her lung, and she slowly regained consciousness after a long coma. As for Phuong Do, his condition was far more critical. 4 bullets were lodged in his body, including wounds in dangerous areas near his spine and abdomen, forcing him to remain hospitalized for weeks of treatment. Miraculously, both of them survived the horrific attack. As soon as their health allowed, they gave detailed statements to police about what happened and confirmed that the shooter was Tuan Minh Pham, Lan's ex-boyfriend. Even so, after 8 long months of chasing every tiny lead, Pham's whereabouts remained a mystery. Then an unexpected turning point came on March 15th, 2013. Just as many feared Pham might have escaped the country, he suddenly appeared at the Howard County Police headquarters in Ellicott City and surrendered. Early that morning, Tuan Minh Pham walked into the police station looking exhausted with untrimmed beard and hair. He raised both hands and, through an interpreter, said he had come to take responsibility. Everything happened quickly and quietly. After a long period on the run, the attacker had finally turned himself in. Some sources reported that while hiding in Virginia, Pham had been living in the shadows, constantly afraid, and had nearly run out of money. Perhaps the pressure of the intense manhunt, combined with the psychological burden, pushed him to surrender and bring an end to his days of running. So, who was Tuan Minh Pham really? Let's sketch a portrait of him based on what police gathered. At the time of the attack, Tuan was 35 years old. A Vietnamese immigrant who came to the United States seeking a better life, he outwardly presented himself as an ordinary citizen. He made a living through working-class jobs and had lived for a time in Beltsville and Laurel, suburban areas around Washington, D.C., with large Vietnamese communities. But behind that normal facade was a deeply frightening personality. Tuan Pham held extreme patriarchal views and wanted absolute control over the woman by his side. Friends of Lan Phan recalled that throughout their time together, Tuan showed his volatile and cruel nature more and more clearly. He was blindly jealous and often erupted at Lan over the smallest things. Many times, he assaulted her, leaving bruises on her body that she tried to hide out of shame and fear. That suffocating environment slowly eroded Lan's confidence, causing her to withdraw and cut off contact with friends, exactly the isolation script Tuan wanted. In terms of social relationships, Tuan lived a fairly closed-off life and had few close friends beyond a handful of fellow Vietnamese. He reportedly bragged to acquaintances that his family in Vietnam was well off, but after coming to the United States, his own path was marked by constant setbacks. It was unclear whether he held steady employment, but in reality, there was a period when he was unemployed and relied entirely on Lan for financial support. Police records showed that before the incident, Tuan did not have a serious criminal record. However, civil court records revealed that Lan Phan had previously sought legal intervention through a protective order. This indicated that Pham's domestic violence had escalated to an alarming level. Even more seriously, the protective order included a clause prohibiting Tuan Pham from possessing firearms, showing that authorities had already been concerned he might use a gun to harm others. Beyond his unstable life and violent behavior, Tuan Pham also revealed himself to be selfish and irresponsible. According to later court testimony, he repeatedly abandoned Lan and their children, sometimes disappearing for months at a time. Only later did Lan realize that during those periods, Tuan had secretly returned to Vietnam to marry another woman and had even fathered a child there. When his double life was exposed and Lan firmly ended the relationship, he did not show remorse. Instead, he turned his anger against her. With his patriarchal mindset, Tuan believed that Lan daring to leave him was unacceptable. That obsession intensified even further when he heard rumors that Lan had someone new. In the twisted mind of a selfish man, her attempt to seek happiness was recast as betrayal. Tuan Minh Pham's motive became painfully clear, a combination of hatred and blind jealousy. He was determined to punish Lan for leaving him and to lash out at anyone by her side, even an innocent person like Phuong Do. In the days leading up to the attack, Tuan Pham prepared with chilling care. He quietly kept a gun ready, closely monitored Lan's work schedule, and chose the exact moment when she was leaving her evening shift. On the afternoon of July 14, 2012, Tuan Minh Pham drove from Beltsville to Ellicott City with a loaded handgun and a rage-filled mind. Watching Lan Phan from a distance and seeing Phuong Thanh Do arrive to pick her up, Tuan immediately assumed he was Lan's new lover. He rushed in to confront him, shouting accusations. The argument quickly escalated into a physical struggle. In the chaos, Tuan Minh Pham pulled out his gun and fired at Phuong Thanh Do, hitting him a total of 4 times. Inside the salon, Lan and her co-workers were stunned by the cracking gunshots and desperate cries for help. When Lan saw Phuong collapse at the entrance, she barely had time to process what was happening before Tuan charged in like a wild animal, his eyes burning with hatred. He coldly aimed the gun and pulled the trigger at her left shoulder. The bullet tore through her shoulder and slammed into the wall, and Lan collapsed instantly. After the shooting, Tuan fled the scene and jumped into his car to escape. Only minutes later, the wail of police and ambulance sirens filled the street. The 2 victims were rushed to the hospital in a life-or-death condition. Now, even though Tuan Minh Pham has surrendered, his name will forever be tied to the label of a cold-blooded attempted killer. It is a stain that cannot be erased, condemned, and despised by both the local Vietnamese community and American society at large. Nearly a year after the attack, Tuan Minh Pham finally stood before the Howard County Circuit Court. The trial, held in October 2013, drew intense attention from the local public, especially within the Vietnamese community. In court, Tuan appeared worn down and relied on an interpreter throughout the proceedings. He faced a lengthy indictment that included 2 counts of first-degree attempted murder, 2 counts of first-degree assault, reckless endangerment, violation of a protective order, and unlawful possession of a firearm. In court, although still physically weak, Lan Phan bravely took the stand to expose the years of abuse she endured while living with the defendant. As she recalled that life or death night, her voice broke through tears. Lan described not only the severe physical aftermath, but also the lasting psychological trauma suffered by her 2 young daughters. Her tearful testimony left the courtroom heavy with sorrow and silent with emotion. As for Phuong Thanh Do, he had to appear in court in a wheelchair. He recounted in shock how a stranger suddenly rushed him and opened fire simply because he had come to pick up Lan for his younger brother. He said he tried to run for his life, but the attacker kept shooting him from behind. Doctors stated that if a bullet had deviated by just a few centimeters, he could have been permanently paralyzed. Phuong told the court he had never met Tuyen and had done nothing to provoke him, completely rejecting any excuse that the defendant acted in self-defense. The statements of the 2 victims, along with witness testimony, painted a full picture of the attack. The shooter's cowardly motive was further reinforced by a series of threatening messages Tuyen had previously sent to terrorize Lan. Throughout the trial, Tuyen Minh Pham was largely silent, his expression icy. Only at sentencing did he speak a few brief lines. Through an interpreter, Tuyen offered an apology for what had happened. But immediately afterward, he turned around and blamed Lan. Shamelessly, he claimed that her disobedience was what caused him to lose control. That absurd justification stunned and angered everyone in the courtroom. Even at that moment, the perpetrator showed no real remorse, only an attempt to shift responsibility onto the victim. After the tense proceedings ended, the jury needed only a short time to deliberate. The outcome was no surprise. They found Tuyen Minh Pham guilty on all major charges. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree attempted murder of Lan Phan and Phuong Do, along with related offenses such as using a firearm in a violent crime and violating a protective order. Finally, a harsh sentence was handed down on December 17, 2013, 65 years and 6 months in prison for Tuyen Minh Pham. As the judge read the term, Pham squeezed his eyes shut and his shoulders slumped in despair. For a 35-year-old man, that number was essentially a life sentence if he lived. He would remain behind bars until he was nearly 100. In the gallery, Lan Phan covered her face and broke down in tears. But this time, they were tears of relief. For her, justice had truly been served, and the long, relentless nightmare had finally come to an end. Nearby, Phuong Do tightly held his younger brother's hand, silently thanking fate that they had both survived to witness this moment. Refusing to accept the outcome, Tuyen Pham's attorney filed an appeal to a higher court, raising technical legal arguments. However, in February 2015, the Maryland Court of Special Appeals upheld most of the original judgment. The only change was the merger of a minor count, which did not affect the total length of the sentence. The case at Nail and Hair Care Spa did not end only behind prison bars. It also left powerful aftershocks in the local community. It became a stark warning about the unpredictable and devastating danger of domestic violence. Lan Phan's tragic story was not merely an individual catastrophe, it also reflected a deeply painful social problem. At the time, the public in Maryland was shaken by the perpetrator's cruelty. A man who had once been a husband and a father, someone who should have protected his family, instead coldly planned to destroy the very home he was meant to safeguard. As for Lan Phan, after the trial, she gradually recovered and courageously rebuilt her life. Today, she stands as a living witness, proof that victims of domestic abuse can rise again with strength. Nearly a decade after the incident, Lan made the brave decision to share her story publicly, working with social organizations to raise awareness in the community. In your view, what should we do to better protect women trapped in toxic relationships before it's too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If today's story gave you meaningful emotions and lessons, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files to join us for the next cases. For now, goodbye, and see you in tomorrow's video.